So, Persia. For over 7,000 years, literally since before Rome was even a thing, this civilization has been one of the biggest deals in human history. Greeks invaded, Arabs invaded, Mongols invaded, everyone tried to conquer them, and somehow, every single time, Persia came back. Their laws, their innovations, the way they saw the world, it's all still woven into how we live today. Tonight we're looking at what it was actually like to live there when they basically ruled the world. Hey, if you listen to these to fall asleep, throw a like on this, or subscribe, whatever. I'm just trying to figure out who actually watches these things. Comment where you're from and what time it is there. I'm recording this at like 2 a.m, so some of you are probably eating lunch in Berlin or something. Alright, tonight it's ancient Persia, but before we go anywhere, get cozy. Like actually cozy. Pillows good? Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. You open your eyes to the cool mountain air. The thin wool blanket does nothing against the pre-dawn chill that seeps through the mud brick walls of your small dwelling. Outside, the jagged peaks of the Zagros Mountains loom dark against a sky just beginning to lighten. This is Persia, 7200 BCE. And you're one of the first farmers in what will become one of history's most enduring civilizations. Unlike your memory foam mattress right now, you're lying on a reed mat over hard-packed earth. Your back aches from another night of sleeping on what is essentially the ground with some decoration. You can hear the goats stirring in their pen outside, their soft bleating, a reminder that your day needs to start now, even though the sun hasn't crested the mountains yet. Your nostrils fill with the familiar scents of your world. Wood smoke from last night's fire still hanging in the air, the earthy smell of the mud brick walls, and that ever-present hint of goat that seems to permeate everything you own. Seriously, everything. Your clothes, your hair, your food. I'm talking next-level goat smell here. Time to get up, your mother calls from the cooking area. The barley won't harvest itself. So, this is how it begins. The story of Persia, one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. Not with grand palaces or mighty armies, but with small villages of farmers figuring out how to survive in the harsh landscape between mountains and desert. Picture those early settlements, clusters of simple mud brick homes with flat roofs huddled together for protection, surrounded by small plots where barley, lentils and legumes are being cultivated for the first time. The Zagros Mountains rise dramatically on one side, their slopes dotted with wild goats and sheep that these early people are just starting to domesticate. On the other side stretch the plains that will one day become part of Mesopotamia. "You know what's wild," says the elder as he shows you how to plant seeds in neat rows. "Our grandparents just wandered around following herds. No homes, no villages, just moved where the food was. Now look at us, making the food come to us instead." The old man has a point. These early settlements like Choga Golan and Choga Bonut were revolutionary. For the first time, humans weren't just taking what nature provided. They were actively shaping their environment to produce what they needed, and the evidence is still around today. Get this, archaeologists found a 7,000-year-old wine jar from these early Persian settlements. It's now sitting in the University of Pennsylvania, which means someone at some point was like, "This super ancient jar that proves early civilization existed, let's ship it halfway around the world." Priorities, am I right? But here's the thing about where your village sits. It's right on the dividing line between two worlds that would shape Persian history for the next 6,000 years. To the east are the mountains, your home with their rough terrain and limited farmland. To the west are the plains of what's now Iraq, with rich soil but few natural defences. The people who lived in these different landscapes developed completely different ways of life. You mountain people became tough, resourceful, with small-scale agriculture and a heavy reliance on herding. You had to be more self-sufficient, able to survive with less. Meanwhile, the plains people built irrigation systems, grew vast amounts of food, and developed more complex hierarchical societies. The plains people think they're better than us, your father scoffs one night as he carves a small wooden figure by firelight, with their big cities and canals. But when raiders come, where do they hide? They have nowhere to go. We have the mountains. This rivalry between mountain people and plains people would last for thousands of years. In fact, the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s was, in many ways, just the most recent episode in this ancient conflict. As the morning progresses, you head down to the valley with your clay pot to collect water. The pot itself is a technological marvel, one of the earliest pieces of pottery ever created. It's heavy and rough-made, but it holds water, and that's what matters. For people who had previously used animal skins or woven baskets lined with pitch, these clay vessels were revolutionary. The path to the stream is well worn, used by generations of your people. As you walk, you pass others from your village, women carrying baskets of wild plants they've gathered to supplement the limited crops, men returning from hunting trips, some successful with small game, others empty-handed. Children running errands or playing simple games with stones and sticks. "Did you hear?" an old woman asks as you pass. Traders came to the village across the valley. They brought shiny rocks from the mountains far to the east, beautiful blue stones that catch the light. She's talking about lapis lazuli, one of the first luxury goods traded across ancient Persia. These early trade networks were the beginnings of what would eventually become the Silk Road, connecting Europe and Asia with Persia at the center. The sun is higher now as you return with your water, and the day's heat has begun in earnest. The village is fully awake, a hive of activity. Some people are working in the fields, others are grinding grain between stones to make flour, and a few are tending to the all-important fire at the center of the village, the fire that must never go out because starting a new one is so difficult. "Wait," says an elder, stopping you on your way. "Look there." He points to the horizon where a small group of strangers is approaching. Traders, maybe, or maybe not. Best tell your father. These moments of uncertainty were constant in early Persian life. With no organized government or military, each village was responsible for its own security. Every stranger could be a friendly trader bringing valuable goods, or a hostile raider coming to steal what you had. Fast forward a couple thousand years, it's now around 4395 BCE, and the world has changed dramatically. Those tiny farming villages have grown into settlements that we might call towns, or even small cities. The most important of these is Susa, which would eventually become the capital of Elam, the very first defined nation in what would become Persia. Susa isn't just any settlement. It's strategically located at the meeting point between the mountains and plains, giving it control over trade routes in all directions. The Sumerian city of Ur to the west has expanded eastward, bringing with it more advanced technologies and organizational structures. Life in Susa is unrecognizable from those early mountain villages. Instead of a few dozen people, thousands now live together in a complex urban environment. The simple mud brick huts have evolved into larger structures with multiple rooms. There are designated areas for different activities, living quarters, workshops, storage facilities, and even primitive temples. You're no longer just a farmer or herder. You might be a craftsperson creating pottery or textiles. You might be a trader traveling between settlements to exchange goods. You might be a priest or priestess responsible for religious rituals, or you might be a warrior defending Susa from outside threats. The city changed everything, an old merchant tells you as you help unload his donkeys laden with goods from distant lands. Before, we were just surviving. Now we're building something that will last. He wasn't wrong. Susa would remain an important economic and trade center for an astonishing 5,500 years until its destruction by the Mongols. Think about that. A single city that lasted longer than most entire civilizations. By around 3200 BCE, Susa had become the capital of Elam, which historians consider the first actual nation in what would become Persia. But Elam wasn't what we would recognize as a modern nation-state. It was more likely a coalition of different peoples and tribes living in the mountains, united by common interests and threats. "What do they call us, those people from the West?" asks a child during an evening gathering. "They call us Elam," answers the storyteller. "It means high country in their tongue, but we know who we are. We are Halami, the people of the mountains." This self-identification as mountain people would remain a defining characteristic of Persian identity throughout history, contrasting with the people of the plains to the west. Life in Elam was structured around the realities of the landscape. The rough mountain terrain wasn't suitable for the intensive irrigation agriculture practiced on the plains, so Elamites developed a system based on semi-nomadic pastoralism with small-scale agriculture in the limited flat areas along valley bottoms. "We follow the seasons," explains a shepherd as you help him move his flock to summer pastures high in the mountains. Winter in the lowlands, summer in the highlands. The animals know the way better than we do now. This lifestyle created a people who were less numerous but hardier than their more sophisticated farming neighbours on the plains. They were skilled at surviving in harsh conditions, adapting to whatever challenges the mountains threw at them. One of the most fascinating aspects of Elamite culture was their art, which focused heavily on animals, especially dogs and bulls. This was quite different from their neighbours, the Sumerians, Akkadians, or Egyptians, who favoured human or human-animal hybrid figures in their art. "See how the dog's ears perk up," says an artisan, showing you a small figurine she's carved. "That means it's alert, protecting us. The dogs are our guardians, just as we are the guardians of these mountains." Elamite religion was similarly distinct, with a strong focus on nature and a mother goddess. Rituals were performed in sacred groves or on mountains rather than in elaborate temples, and unlike many ancient religions, which were often exclusive and intolerant, Elamite religion was remarkably open, tolerating and even incorporating the gods of neighbouring peoples. "All gods deserve respect," a priest explains as he prepares for a ritual at a sacred grove. "The gods of our neighbours may not be our gods, but they are gods nonetheless." Another unique aspect of Elamite culture was the position of women, who enjoyed a level of equality rarely seen in the ancient world. In Elamite art, women are represented as equals, and queens are shown as equal to kings. This cultural trait would persist in later Persian societies, where women maintained higher status than in many contemporary civilizations. "My grandmother ruled her family with an iron fist," laughs a young woman as she weaves a complex pattern on her loom. "My grandfather was technically the head of the household, but everyone knew who really made the decisions." But life wasn't always peaceful for the Elamites. As a border region between the mountains and plains, Elam was frequently caught up in conflicts. In fact, the first war ever recorded in history was between Elam and Sumer, with the Sumerians invading and looting Elam around 2700 BCE. "They came from the west," an old warrior tells the younger men, pointing to the scars on his body. "Like a flood," they said, "too many to count. We fought, but..." He falls silent, the memory still painful even years later. Susa would fall under Sumerian control during the reign of the legendary Sargon of Akkad. But as the saying goes, nothing lasts forever. By 1100 BCE, Elam had risen again to become a major power in the region. Under King Shutruk-Nahunta, Elamite forces rolled over most of the cities around Babylon, briefly establishing Elam as the dominant force in the region, but internal conflicts prevented them from maintaining their grip on power, and the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, eventually conquered Elam in 1120 BCE. This cycle of conquest and reconquest illustrates a pattern that would repeat throughout Persian history, the difficulty of establishing lasting victory in a region marked by such diverse peoples and challenging geography. Despite these military struggles, Elam prospered through trade. Archaeological evidence shows they were trading with the entire known world, not just their immediate neighbours. In Susa, archaeologists have found artifacts from the Indus Valley civilization in modern-day Pakistan, as well as objects from eastern Iran and Afghanistan. This came all the way from the east, says a merchant, showing you a small object made of lapis lazuli, past the great mountains, past the great deserts, from a land where the rivers are wider than 10 men lying head to foot. They say there are cities there bigger than 10 Susas. Afghanistan was also one of the major sources of tin, an essential metal needed to make bronze, the most advanced metal of the period. Elam was likely involved in this trade, perhaps buying tin from the east and reselling it to Mesopotamians or even Egyptians. The Elamites were also trading in other resources that the plains lacked. Stone, metal, and wood were all scarce in the more desertic plains crossed by the Tigris-Euphrates river system. The mountain people had access to these vital materials and could trade them for the agricultural surplus produced by the plains people. Or stone for grain, metal for cloth, wood for pottery, recites a trader as he negotiates with visitors from the west. This is how it has always been. This is how it will always be. These trading routes would eventually evolve into the Silk Road, connecting Europe to Asia, with Persia as the connecting point between the two. For thousands of years, Persia would serve as the crossroads of the world, a place where goods, ideas, and cultures flowed in all directions. By 2000 BCE, a new factor entered the equation, the arrival of Iranian or Aryan peoples into the region. These were nomads who originated from the steppes of Eurasia, living a lifestyle similar to other nomadic peoples like the Proto-Slavs, Turks, and Mongols. They came with their horses and their strange tongue, an elder recounts to wide-eyed children around a nighttime fire. They were fierce warriors, but they knew nothing of building or planting. We taught them these things, and they taught us their ways of riding and fighting. Over time, the Elamites and Iranians began to mix, especially in the south of the country. This was a gradual process that stretched over more than a millennium. The Elamite culture would persist long after the Iranian people became dominant in the region. In fact, even after Iranian rulers took political control, the Elamite language continued to be used as the main administrative language. This suggests that while the Iranians ruled and colonized the area, the legal and administrative system was still operated by native Elamites who understood the complexities of governing settled populations. It was like the new bosses keeping the old middle management because they were the only ones who knew how the filing system worked. As you lie down to sleep in your mud brick home, the sounds of the village quieting around you, you reflect on the strange and wondrous path your people have walked, from those first farmers figuring out how to grow barley in the shadow of the Zagros Mountains, to the sophisticated traders and craftspeople of Susa, to the mixing of cultures as the Iranian nomads arrived. The story of Persia had only just begun. But already the key elements that would define Persian civilization were taking shape. The tension between mountain and plain, the openness to foreign cultures and ideas, the position of women, the importance of trade, and above all, the remarkable resilience that would allow Persia to endure through countless invasions and transformations. The stars shine bright above the mountains as you drift off to sleep, unaware that you're part of the opening chapter in one of history's greatest epics, the story of a civilization that would survive and thrive for thousands of years, influencing the entire world in ways you could never imagine. Unlike you in your comfortable bed right now, drifting off with your climate control and memory foam, these early Persians faced a world of constant challenges, harsh terrain, limited resources, hostile neighbours. Yet from these difficult beginnings would emerge an empire that ruled the world. And that empire's story is just beginning to unfold. The warm glow of dawn creeps across the high plateau, lighting up the nomad camp where you've spent the night. This isn't the Persia of Elam anymore. We've jumped forward in time to around 700 BCE. The world has changed. Your people, Iranian nomads originally from the steppes, have been here for over a millennium now, gradually mixing with the locals, adopting some of their ways while bringing your own. You push aside the heavy felt covering of your yurt and step out into the crisp morning air. The camp is already stirring, horses being fed, children collecting water, women preparing the morning meal. Smoke rises from dozens of cooking fires hanging in the still air. "Hey, Sleeping Beauty!" calls your cousin, already saddling his horse. "The hunting party leaves soon, unless you'd rather milk the goats with the children." Life as a nomad on these high plains is defined by constant movement following the seasons and the grazing. You don't build permanent homes or grow crops like the settled folk in the valleys. Instead, your wealth and survival depend on your herds: horses, sheep, goats, cattle. You pack your entire life on horseback and move with the rhythms of nature. Unlike your warm, stationary bed right now, these nomads rarely slept in the same place for more than a few weeks. Their homes, yurts or tents, were designed to be broken down and transported easily when the tribe needed to move on. Just imagine packing up your entire house every month or so, loading it onto horses and setting up somewhere new, and you thought moving apartments was a pain in the arse. "Bad news from the west," your uncle says, as the men gather around the central fire. He's just returned from trading with a settlement in the lowlands. The Assyrians are expanding again. They've taken 3 more towns in the foothills. A murmur of concern ripples through the group. The Assyrians are the dominant power in Mesopotamia, feared for their military might and brutal treatment of conquered peoples. For generations, the Iranian tribes have managed to avoid their direct rule, moving into the high mountains when threats appeared. But the Assyrians grow stronger each year, and the safe spaces fewer. "They skin people alive, you know," says an older warrior, his face marked with the scars of past battles. "Hang the skins on their city walls as warnings. I've seen it." The mood grows somber. These aren't just campfire tales meant to frighten children. The Assyrians really did use extreme violence as a psychological weapon. Imagine walking up to a city and seeing the flayed skins of the last people who defied them hanging on the walls. That's next-level nightmare fuel. "One tribe alone cannot stand against them," your father says, finally breaking the uneasy silence. "But we are not alone." He's right. Over the past century, something remarkable has been happening among the Iranian peoples of this region. Groups that had been separate, sometimes even hostile to each other, are starting to join together. The most powerful of these confederations are the Medes, who have begun to create something new, a unified Iranian state. While Elam had been a kind of coalition of mountain peoples, the Median Empire represents something different, a deliberate, organized unification of various Iranian tribes under a single ruler. Their king, Deioces, who ruled from around 727 to 675 BCE, is considered the first real Iranian emperor. My grandfather fought with Deioces in the eastern campaigns, boasts a warrior from a neighbouring clan who's visiting your camp. He said the king could shoot an arrow through an apple at 50 paces. My grandmother could do that while churning butter, someone calls back, drawing laughter from the group. Tall tales aside, the rise of the Medes marked a crucial turning point in Persian history. For the first time, the Iranian peoples weren't just reacting to external powers, they were becoming a power themselves, but the Medes faced a formidable enemy in the Assyrians. For generations, the Assyrian Empire had dominated Mesopotamia and beyond with its advanced military techniques and ruthless policies. They were, by any measure, the superpower of their day. Yet the tide was turning. The Median unification was largely a reaction to Assyrian brutality and oppression. Nothing brings enemies together like a common threat, right? Under the leadership of Cyaxares, grandson of Deioces, the Medes formed an alliance with the Babylonians and launched a coordinated attack against the Assyrian Empire. In 612 BCE, they succeeded in destroying the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, an event so momentous that people recorded it across the ancient world. My father was there when Nineveh fell, an old trader tells you as your caravan makes its way through a mountain pass. He said the city burned for 3 days, smoke so thick it turned day to night. The screams, he trails off, lost in the memory. And the loot, prompts a younger man eagerly. The old trader grins, revealing missing teeth. More gold than you could carry in a lifetime. By around 700 BCE, Iranian peoples like the Medes, Persians and Parthians dominated the region. The Medes had established themselves as the preeminent power, but they weren't the only players in the game. To the south, another Iranian group, the Persians, were establishing their own identity under their own kings. And this brings us to one of history's most remarkable figures, Cyrus the Great. Now, here's where things get wild. Cyrus started as a vassal, basically a subordinate king, to the Medes. His grandfather had been an independent ruler, but by Cyrus's time, the Persians had fallen under Median dominance. If you're keeping score at home, that puts Cyrus pretty low in the ancient world's power rankings. Not exactly where you'd expect the founder of history's largest empire to start, right? In 553 BCE, Cyrus did something that changed the course of history. He rebelled against his Median overlords. The odds were not in his favour. The Medes had a larger army, more resources, and a fearsome reputation. By all accounts, Cyrus should have been crushed, executed, and forgotten by history, except that's not what happened. When the Median king sent his general, Harpagus, to put down Cyrus's rebellion, something unexpected occurred. Instead of fighting each other, Cyrus and Harpagus teamed up against the Median Empire. Wait, what? The general switched sides, you might be thinking. Yep. And honestly, no one's entirely sure why. The ancient sources, including the Greek historian Herodotus, tell stories full of prophecies, dreams, and divine intervention, but they're more myth than history. What we do know is that Harpagus joined Cyrus, bringing a significant portion of the Median army with him, and together they overthrew the Median king. Generals, man, sighs a veteran soldier as he shows you how to string a composite bow, always thinking they could run things better than the king. With this stunning reversal of fortune, Cyrus found himself not just free from Median control, but actually in charge of the Median Empire. And he was just getting started. In 539 BCE, Cyrus conquered Babylon, the greatest city of its day and capital of a powerful empire. This wasn't just any military victory, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare, political maneuvering, and cultural sensitivity. Instead of destroying Babylon or enslaving its people, the standard playbook for conquerors in this period, Cyrus presented himself as a liberator, welcomed by both the people and their gods. He even issued what some historians consider the first declaration of human rights, allowing conquered peoples to keep their customs, religions, and a degree of self-governance. The Babylonians cheered when we entered the city, recalls an old Persian soldier, shaking his head in disbelief. Threw flowers at our horses. Never seen anything like it. Usually we're dodging arrows, not flowers. By 533 BCE, Cyrus had pushed eastward, conquering parts of what is now India. His empire stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indus River, encompassing diverse peoples, languages, cultures, and religions. It was, at that point, the largest empire the world had ever seen. But the true genius of Cyrus wasn't just in conquest, it was in governance. He created a centralized administration with governors called satraps who managed their domains efficiently. These weren't just puppet rulers, they had real power and responsibility. But to make sure they didn't get too independent, Cyrus established a network of spies called the King's Eyes, who reported directly to him. Trust, but verify would have been a good bumper sticker for his chariots. The Persian Empire also had 4 capitals, a practical solution to ruling such a vast territory and a reflection of Cyrus's policy of respecting local autonomy. Still, the center of administration was at Susa, the old Elamite capital we met in Section 1. Some institutions really do stand the test of time. Perhaps most impressive was the empire's communication system. Cyrus established a relay network where couriers could always find fresh food, water, shelter, and horses at stations no more than 2 days' travel apart. This allowed messages to move across the empire at unprecedented speeds. Best job in the empire, grins a young courier, stretching his legs after a hard ride. See the world, sleep in clean beds, eat good food. Beats being a foot soldier any day, though the saddle sores are a killer. The system that Cyrus created was so effective that successive empires and invaders kept it almost identical until the Muslim conquests, a millennium and a half later. That's like someone setting up a government system during the fall of Rome that was still being used, largely unchanged, in the age of Napoleon. Talk about building to last. Cyrus's influence reached so far into the future that Thomas Jefferson read his biography as one of the sources of inspiration for the United States Declaration of Independence. Not bad for a guy who started as a vassal king of a secondary power, but beyond these administrative achievements, Cyrus was known for something even more unusual in ancient conquerors: mercy and tolerance. When he conquered Babylon in 539 BCE, he freed the Israelites who had been enslaved there, allowing them to return to Jerusalem. This act was so significant that the Hebrew Bible praises Cyrus as a Messiah, the only non-Jewish figure to receive this distinction. He walked into the temple of Marduk and made offerings according to their customs, marvels a Persian priest, speaking of Cyrus's time in Babylon. Then he visited the temple of the Jewish god and did the same, said all gods deserve respect, even those of conquered peoples. This respect for local cultures and religions became a hallmark of Persian rule. Cyrus was considered a father figure by Iranians and a liberator by Babylonians, quite the contrast to the typical ancient conqueror who was usually feared and hated by those they subjugated. Life for ordinary people under the Persian Empire was generally better than under previous regimes. The satraps were expected to govern efficiently and fairly, and there were mechanisms in place to address corruption or abuse of power. My grandfather served as a scribe in the satrap's court, a merchant tells you as your caravan makes camp for the night. Said it was the most orderly government he'd ever seen. Records for everything. Taxes collected, justice dispensed, grain stored. Nothing happened without being written down. This level of organisation allowed for greater prosperity and stability across the empire. Trade flourished, with goods moving freely along secure roads. The famous Royal Road, running from Sardis near the Mediterranean to Susa in the heart of the empire, became one of the world's first highways, complete with inns, checkpoints and bridges. Military service was both a duty and an opportunity for social advancement. The empire needed soldiers from all its territories, and those who served well could rise to positions of influence regardless of their origins. Among the military units, none were more famous than the Immortals, an elite force of 10,000 men that served as the emperor's personal guard and shock troops. They were called Immortals because their number was always maintained at exactly 10,000. When one died or retired, he was immediately replaced, giving the impression that none of them ever died. "The armour is heavier than it looks," complains a young recruit, adjusting his bronze scales, "and these sleeves are ridiculous in the heat." Fashion concerns aside, the Immortals were the elite of the elite, the special forces of their day. Their presence on a battlefield often decided the outcome before a single arrow was loosed. The Persian Empire under Cyrus developed a reputation for justice and fair treatment that was unusual for its time. The legal system emphasized truth and righteousness, with harsh penalties for lying or breaking oaths. Judges were expected to be impartial, and there were checks against corruption. "The king's justice reaches everywhere," a village elder tells a group of children gathered around a fire, "even to the most remote corners of the empire. No one is above the law, not even the satraps." While this may have been somewhat idealized, no empire in history has been free from corruption and injustice. The Persian legal system was genuinely progressive for its time. There was an emphasis on evidence over superstition, proportional punishment, and consistent application of the law. Cyrus the Great died in 530 BCE, reportedly in battle against nomadic tribes in Central Asia. His body was returned to his heartland in Fars, the origin of the name Persia, where a tomb was built that still stands today as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. His son Cambyses II continued the expansion, conquering Phoenicia and Cyprus in 525 BCE, followed by Egypt, Nubia, and parts of modern-day Libya in the same year. The Persian Empire now stretched across 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, an unprecedented achievement. Everyday life for common people in the Persian Empire varied greatly depending on location, social status, and occupation. In the heartland regions like Fars and Media, many people continued traditional pastoral lifestyles, herding sheep and goats in the mountains and high plateaus. Others settled in the growing cities, becoming craftspeople, merchants, or servants. "City folk think they're so sophisticated," scoffs an old shepherd as he watches his flock on a hillside, "but they forget where their wool comes from, where their meat comes from. Without us, they'd be naked and hungry." Agriculture was the backbone of the economy, with barley, wheat, and various fruits being the main crops. The empire invested heavily in irrigation systems to expand farmland, particularly in the more arid regions. Women in Persian society generally enjoyed more rights and respect than in many contemporary civilizations. They could own property, run businesses, and travel with relative freedom. High-status women could even hold positions of influence, though formal political power remained largely in male hands. My wife manages our household accounts better than any royal treasurer, laughs a merchant as he shares a meal with travellers, and woe to anyone who tries to cheat her at the market. She can calculate faster than a Babylonian mathematician. Persian food reflected the diversity of the empire, incorporating ingredients and techniques from various regions. The basic diet consisted of bread, cheese, yogurt, fruits, and vegetables, with meat being more common among the wealthy. Wine was the preferred drink of the elite, while the common people drank beer similar to that of Mesopotamia. Persian cuisine is the best in the world, declares a royal cook with absolute certainty. We take the finest ingredients from every corner of the empire, spices from India, olives from Greece, dates from Egypt, and combine them in ways no one else has imagined. Housing ranged from nomadic tents to simple mud brick homes to elaborate palaces. Most ordinary people lived in basic dwellings with few amenities, while the elite enjoyed luxurious surroundings with gardens, courtyards, and decorative elements. A man's home should reflect his station, advises a wealthy merchant, showing off his new residence with evident pride. Mine says I am successful, respectable, but not ostentatious. Never flaunt your wealth too boldly. It attracts both thieves and tax collectors. Education was valued, particularly for boys from elite families who learned reading, writing, mathematics, and physical skills like riding and archery. The famous Persian emphasis on speaking the truth was instilled from childhood. 3 things a Persian boy must learn, recites a teacher to his young pupils: to ride a horse, to shoot a bow, and to speak the truth. The first 2 make him useful to the empire. The third makes him worthy of it. Religious practices were diverse across the empire, with Cyrus's policy of tolerance allowing different faiths to coexist. Among the Iranian peoples themselves, early forms of what would later become Zoroastrianism were practiced, with fire as a sacred element and an emphasis on the eternal struggle between truth and falsehood. The system that Cyrus established would last, with modifications, through several dynasties. His empire, the Achaemenid Empire, named after his claimed ancestor Achaemenes, would rule for over 2 centuries, setting patterns of governance, culture, and identity that would influence all future Persian states. An empire of many peoples, yet one people, muses an old administrator watching a procession of representatives from various provinces bringing tribute to the king. Egyptians, Babylonians, Lydians, Bactrians, all different, yet all Persian now. As you lie down to sleep in your quarters, a humble room in one of the countless way stations that dot the royal road, you reflect on the transformation you've witnessed, from those first farming villages in the Zagros Mountains to the Elamite Confederation, to this vast empire spanning 3 continents. The story of Persia is one of constant evolution and surprising resilience. The stars shine bright through the small window, the same stars that looked down on Cyrus as he planned his conquests, on the messengers racing along these roads carrying the emperor's words, on the countless ordinary people whose lives were shaped by the unprecedented peace and prosperity the Persian Empire brought to much of the ancient world. And as you drift off to sleep, far more comfortable than your ancestors in their mountain huts, but not nearly as comfortable as you are now in your modern bed, you wonder what will come next for this remarkable civilization, because Cyrus's death isn't the end of the Persian story. In many ways, it's just the beginning. The first rays of morning sunlight hit your face as you stand on the grand stairway of Persepolis. This isn't the Persia of nomadic tribes or the early conquests of Cyrus anymore. We've moved forward to around 500 BCE, the height of the Achaemenid Empire under Darius III, and you're at the beating heart of the most powerful civilization on Earth. The imperial capital sprawls before you, a masterpiece of architecture and engineering unlike anything the world has seen. Massive stone columns soar overhead, topped with elaborate capitals in the shape of bulls and lions. Intricate reliefs cover every surface, showing peoples of all the empire's nations bringing tribute to the great king. "Step aside," barks a palace guard, clearing a path for a procession of nobles in colourful robes. The King of Kings receives petitioners today. This is Persia at its zenith, an empire spanning 3 continents, governing diverse peoples from dozens of cultures, a true superpower of the ancient world, and the man responsible for much of this grandeur, Darius I, known as Darius the Great. While Cyrus laid the groundwork, Darius was the master builder who transformed the Persian Empire into an administrative and cultural powerhouse. When he took the throne in 522 BCE, the empire faced rebellions and instability following the death of Cyrus's son. Darius not only crushed these rebellions but expanded Persian territory to its greatest extent. "You should have seen the Behistun inscription when it was new," an old scribe tells you, referring to the massive rock relief Darius commissioned to commemorate his victories. The colours were so vivid you could see them from a day's journey away. 3 languages carved into the living rock proclaiming the king's glory to all the world. That inscription still exists today, by the way. Historians consider it the Persian equivalent of the Rosetta Stone, crucial for deciphering ancient languages. Talk about a monument with staying power. Under Darius, the empire reached from the Indus Valley in modern Pakistan to Thrace in Europe, and from Central Asia to Egypt and parts of Libya. Approximately 44% of the world's population lived under Persian rule. For perspective, that would be like a single country today governing over 3.5 billion people. But it wasn't just the size that made Darius's empire impressive, it was how well it functioned. 20 provinces, each with its satrap, each with its tribute, each with its laws, explains a treasury official as he shows you the records room filled with clay tablets in multiple languages, yet all connected by royal roads, royal messengers, royal coinage, many peoples, one empire. Darius standardized and refined the administrative systems that Cyrus had established. He divided the empire into provinces called satrapies, each governed by a satrap who had considerable autonomy but ultimately answered to the king. He standardized taxation, established the first imperial coinage, and expanded the royal road system to nearly 1,700 miles. Makes trade a hell of a lot easier, a merchant tells you at a roadside inn. Before, every little kingdom had different laws, different tolls, different weights and measures. Now, same coins work from Sardis to Susa, same weights, same measures, same royal guarantees of safe passage. I've tripled my business in 5 years. Beyond governance and military expansion, the Persians under Darius were master engineers and innovators. Perhaps their most impressive achievement was the Qanat system, underground aqueducts that brought water from the mountains to arid regions. Picture this. You're in a landscape that gets maybe 5 inches of rain a year. Survival, let alone civilization, seems impossible, but the Persians had an ingenious solution. "My grandfather helped build this Qanat," says a local farmer, pointing to a line of small mounds stretching across the desert landscape. Each of those mounds marks a shaft, but the real Qanat is underground, a tunnel sloping gently downward, carrying water from the mountains to our fields. These underground water channels were engineering marvels. Workers would dig a mother well at a water source, usually in the mountains, then dig a series of vertical shafts leading down to a gently sloping tunnel. Water would flow through this tunnel, sometimes for dozens of miles, before emerging near settlements or agricultural areas. The slope has to be perfect, explains the local Qanat master who maintains the system. Too steep and the water flows too fast, eroding the tunnel. Too shallow and the water stagnates. And all of this calculated and dug by hand in the dark, centuries before modern instruments. The Qanat system allowed Persian civilization to flourish in regions that would otherwise be uninhabitable, and they built them to last. Some Qanats constructed during the Achaemenid period are still in use today, over 2,500 years later. Imagine turning on your tap and getting water from a system built when the Romans were still just a small city-state. Another remarkable Persian invention was the yakchal, an ancient refrigeration system. These were large dome-shaped structures with deep underground storage spaces where ice could be kept year-round, even in the desert. "We collect ice in winter from the mountains," explains the keeper of a royal yakchal. "Store it here, packed in layers of straw. The thick walls keep the heat out, and the heat that does get in rises up and out through vents in the top. The royal table enjoys chilled fruits and sherbets, even in midsummer." Persian engineers also created sophisticated ventilation systems called badgirs or wind catchers. These tower-like structures captured passing breezes and funneled them down into buildings, creating natural air conditioning in the sweltering heat. "Sit here, under the badgir," invites a wealthy merchant in his courtyard home. "Feel how cool it is? That's Persian ingenuity for you. No need for slaves waving fans when you have architecture that works with nature." Life for ordinary Persians varied greatly depending on social class, location, and occupation, but it was generally characterized by greater stability and prosperity than in earlier periods. At the top of society was the king, considered the representative of Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity on earth. Below him was a small elite of noble families, high officials, and military commanders who enjoyed enormous wealth and privilege. "Those gold bracelets he's wearing," whispers a guide as a nobleman passes by, "worth more than what a farmer earns in 10 years, and that's just the jewellery he wears to breakfast." The middle classes included merchants, craftspeople, scribes, and minor officials. Many of these people lived in growing urban centres and benefited from the empire's extensive trade networks. Their homes were typically built around courtyards with rooms opening onto this central space, providing privacy, light, and ventilation. "Business is good," a textile merchant in the Persepolis market tells you. "Wool from the highlands, cotton from Egypt, silk from the Far East. I have 3 apprentices now, and I'm thinking of opening another shop in Susa." At the bottom of society were peasants, labourers, and slaves. Peasants formed the majority of the population, working small plots of land and paying taxes to the empire, often in the form of crops or labour. Slavery existed, but was not as widespread or economically important as in contemporary Greece or later in Rome. "My father was a free tenant farmer, and his father before him," a young man tells you as he works in the fields outside a village. "We grow the barley, keep some for ourselves, give some to the landowner, some to the temple, some to the king. It's a living." Religion played a crucial role in Persian life, with Zoroastrianism gradually emerging as the most influential faith. Founded by the prophet Zarathustra, known to the Greeks as Zoroaster, this religion was one of the world's first monotheistic faiths and profoundly influenced later religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. At the heart of Zoroastrian belief was the cosmic struggle between Ahura Mazda, the creator and source of all goodness, and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. Humans had to choose which side to support through their thoughts, words, and deeds. "Good thoughts, good words, good deeds," recites a Zoroastrian priest as he tends a sacred fire. "This is the path to righteousness, not through elaborate rituals or animal sacrifices, but through moral choices in everyday life." Fire held a special place in Zoroastrian worship as a symbol of purity and the divine presence. Temples housed sacred flames that were kept burning perpetually, tended by priests who covered their mouths to prevent their breath from polluting the sacred fire. Some foreigners call us fire worshippers, the priest says, with a hint of annoyance. But we do not worship fire itself. The fire is a symbol, a representation of the divine light of Ahura Mazda. Through its purity, we commune with the Creator. Zoroastrianism introduced concepts that would become central to many later religions: a single supreme god, angels and demons, heaven and hell, a final judgment, and the eventual triumph of good over evil. It emphasized free will and personal moral responsibility in a way that was revolutionary for its time. Each soul must choose, explains an elder to a group of children gathered for religious instruction. Every day, in every action, will you follow the path of Asher, truth and righteousness, or will you follow the lie? No one can choose for you, not even the King of Kings. Persian society was notably tolerant of religious diversity. While the royal family and nobility largely followed Zoroastrian practices, subjects were free to worship according to their own traditions. Jews, Babylonians, Egyptians, and others maintained their religious identities within the empire. In Babylon, they destroyed our temples, says a Jewish merchant who returned to Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile. Under Persian rule, they rebuilt them. That is the difference. Daily life in the Persian Empire reflected a blend of practical concerns and cultural values. Food centered around bread, dairy products, fruits and vegetables, with meat being relatively rare for common people but abundant at royal and noble tables. Wine was popular among the elite, who took their drinking seriously. Important decisions were sometimes debated twice, once while sober and once while drunk. If it still seems like a good idea in both states, laughs a court official, then we know it's truly wise. Personal cleanliness was highly valued, with regular bathing being common practice. Persian nobles were known for their elaborate grooming routines, including the oiling and curling of hair and beards. A proper Persian gentleman, says a barber as he trims a customer's beard, should smell of rosewater and sandalwood, not sweat and horses like those Greeks. Speaking of Greeks, it was during Darius's reign that the Persian Empire first came into significant conflict with the Greek city-states. In 499 BCE, Greek cities on the western coast of Anatolia, modern Turkey, then under Persian rule, rebelled with support from Athens and other mainland Greek cities. Darius crushed the rebellion but didn't forget Athens' involvement. In 492 BCE, he launched the first Persian invasion of Greece, intending to punish those who had supported the rebellion and expand Persian territory into Europe. Should be an easy campaign, a confident Persian officer tells his troops as they prepare to sail. These Greeks can't even agree among themselves, let alone stand against the might of Persia. He wasn't entirely wrong about Greek disunity, but he seriously underestimated their fighting spirit. The first invasion was largely derailed by a storm that destroyed much of the Persian fleet. Darius tried again in 490 BCE, but his forces were defeated at the Battle of Marathon by a smaller Athenian army. They just kept coming, gasps a Persian survivor of Marathon, his eyes wide with the memory. Our arrows blackened the sky, but they didn't stop. They ran straight into our lines. I've never seen such madness or such courage. Angered by this unexpected defeat, Darius planned a third, larger invasion, but died in 486 BCE before he could launch it. His son and successor, Xerxes, would take up the cause. Despite this military setback, Darius's reign marked the high point of the Achaemenid Empire. Under his rule, Persepolis was transformed from a ceremonial center to a magnificent capital that showcased the empire's wealth and power. Every stone was brought from the mountains, a supervisor explains as you watch workers polishing a massive column. Every beam of cedar from Lebanon, artists from Egypt, craftsmen from Babylon, laborers from a dozen nations, 30 years of work, and still we build. This will be the wonder of the world when it is complete. The art and architecture of this period combined elements from all the empire's subject peoples, creating a unique imperial style that reflected Persian concepts of kingship and cosmic order. The famous Apadana relief at Persepolis shows delegates from 23 different nations bringing tribute to the king, a visual representation of the empire's diversity and the king's universal rule. Each delegation is shown in their native dress, with their characteristic gifts, explains a court artist proudly. The Bactrians with their camels, the Lydians with their gold, the Indians with their spices, all acknowledging the King of Kings, yet all depicted with respect as they truly are. This artistic inclusiveness reflected the larger Persian approach to empire, incorporating and adapting rather than simply imposing. Persian kings presented themselves as protectors of local traditions, not destroyers of them. A wise ruler, advises an old courtier who has served 3 kings, knows that 20 different peoples cannot be governed in exactly the same way. What works in Egypt will fail in Bactria. What pleases the Babylonians will anger the Jews. The art is in finding the common threads that bind them all to Persia, while allowing them to remain themselves. Education for the Persian nobility emphasized physical training alongside intellectual development. Young men learned riding, archery, and javelin throwing, as well as truth-telling, which was considered both a religious and civic virtue. The famous quote attributed to Herodotus that Persian boys were taught to ride, to shoot, and to tell the truth captures this educational philosophy. A Persian noble who cannot ride or shoot is no Persian at all, declares a grizzled military instructor as he watches young men practice archery. And one who lies? He is worse than an enemy. He is a servant of the lie, an ally of Angra Mainyu himself. For girls and women, particularly from elite families, education included household management, weaving, music, and sometimes literacy. Persian women enjoyed more rights and freedoms than their counterparts in many contemporary societies, including the right to own property and businesses. "My mother taught me to read and write," a young noblewoman tells you as she supervises household accounts. "My husband manages the king's horses. I manage everything else, our estate, our servants, our finances. He may rule outside our home, but within these walls I am the authority." As night falls on Persepolis, you watch from a terrace as thousands of lamps are lit across the city, creating a landscape of twinkling lights that rivals the stars overhead. In the distance, you can hear music, the sound of a celebration in one of the royal halls, where dancers, musicians, and acrobats entertain the nobility. The Persian Empire under Darius represents a remarkable achievement, a vast multicultural state that managed to balance central authority with local autonomy, military might with administrative efficiency, traditional values with cultural innovation. It wasn't perfect and it wouldn't last forever, but it established patterns of governance and culture that would influence all future empires. As you drift off to sleep in your guest quarters, far more luxurious than anything your ancestors could have imagined, but still lacking the memory foam comfort of your modern bed, you wonder what challenges this mighty empire will face in the years to come. Because even at the height of its power, storm clouds are gathering on the horizon, and the next chapter in Persia's story might be its most dramatic yet. The scent of burning oil hangs heavy in the night air, Torches line the royal road, illuminating thousands of soldiers assembled in precise formation. We're in Susa around 480 BCE, and the atmosphere crackles with tension. Xerxes, son of Darius and new king of kings, is addressing his generals before launching the greatest military expedition the world has ever seen. "My father's work remains unfinished," Xerxes declares, his voice carrying across the assembled officers. "The insult of Marathon must be answered. The Greeks must learn the cost of defiance. Unlike your peaceful bedroom right now, with its soft lighting and temperature control, this Persian war council thrums with primal energy, ambition, pride, and the intoxicating scent of impending violence. Men who command thousands stand in respectful silence before their king who commands millions." Xerxes, who inherited the Persian throne after Darius's death, has spent years planning this second invasion of Greece. It's a massive undertaking. Historians estimate his force included over 200,000 warriors drawn from across the empire, supported by a fleet of 1,200 ships. "The logistics alone are a nightmare," confides a Persian quartermaster as you help inventory supplies. "Feeding this many men, every day we need 400,000 pounds of grain, 50,000 gallons of water. The animals need fodder, the ships need repair materials. One mistake in the supply chain and the entire army could starve." The scale of the operation was unprecedented. Xerxes even ordered the construction of a pontoon bridge across the Hellespont, the strait separating Asia from Europe, effectively lashing together hundreds of ships to create a floating roadway nearly a mile long. When a storm destroyed the first attempt, Xerxes supposedly had the sea whipped as punishment. Anger management wasn't his strong suit. "I saw it with my own eyes," insists a Persian engineer who helped build the bridge. 2 miles of ships lashed together, then planks laid across, earth and brush on top of that. The army took 7 days and 7 nights to cross, the greatest feat of engineering in history, and the Greeks will never even see it. Despite initial successes, including the famous Battle of Thermopylae, yes, the 300 Spartans won, though in reality there were about 7,000 Greeks, and the burning of Athens, the Persian invasion didn't go as planned. At the naval battle of Salamis in 480 BCE, the Greek fleet outmaneuvered and defeated the larger Persian navy. "It was a trap," laments a Persian naval officer, one of the survivors of Salamis. "They drew us into narrow waters where our numbers worked against us. Ships couldn't maneuver, couldn't support each other. It was chaos, pure chaos." Fearing being cut off in Europe, Xerxes retreated to Asia with much of his army, leaving his general Mardonius to continue the war. The following year, the remaining Persian forces were defeated at the Battle of Plataea, effectively ending the invasion. This defeat marked a significant turning point. Though still enormously powerful, the Persian Empire would never again attempt to conquer mainland Greece. The two civilizations settled into an uneasy relationship of trade, diplomacy, occasional warfare, and mutual cultural influence. For the next 150 years, the Achaemenid Empire remained the dominant power in Asia, but it gradually lost the dynamism and administrative efficiency it had shown under Cyrus and Darius. Court intrigues, assassinations, and rebellions became more common. Provincial governors grew more independent, sometimes acting like kings in their own territories. "My grandfather served the great king's father," an elderly palace servant tells you as he goes about his duties in the royal household at Susa. In those days, the king's word was law from the sunrise to the sunset. Now, satraps delay paying tribute. Subject peoples grumble. The court itself is a nest of vipers, each faction plotting against the others. Life for ordinary Persians continued much as before, but the sense of imperial purpose and identity began to weaken. The empire was no longer expanding, no longer innovating as it once had. It maintained what previous generations had built rather than creating something new. And then came Alexander. In 336 BCE, a 20-year-old king named Alexander inherited the throne of Macedonia, a kingdom north of Greece proper. Within 2 years, he had united the Greek city-states under his leadership, sometimes through diplomacy, sometimes through brute force. Then he turned his gaze eastward toward the Persian Empire. They say he sleeps with a copy of Homer's Iliad under his pillow, a Persian spy reports to his superiors after returning from Macedonia, fancies himself a new Achilles. His father was assassinated, probably by Alexander himself, though no one dares say it aloud. The boy is dangerous. Brilliant, but dangerous. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed into Persian territory with an army of about 50,000 men, relatively small by Persian standards but exceptionally well trained and led by experienced generals. The great king at this time was Darius III, who had come to the throne just 2 years earlier through palace intrigue rather than direct inheritance. "Never heard of this Alexander until he crossed our borders," scoffs a Persian nobleman in Sardis. Another Greek troublemaker, the King of Kings has swatted aside dozens like him. This one will be no different. This confidence would prove catastrophically misplaced. Alexander moved quickly, defeating Persian forces in western Anatolia and freeing Greek cities from Persian rule. His decisive approach to warfare, personally leading charges at critical moments, contrasted sharply with Persian kings who typically commanded from the rear. The first major confrontation between Alexander and Darius III came at the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE. Despite commanding a significantly larger force, Darius made a critical tactical error, engaging the Greeks in a narrow coastal plain where his numerical advantage couldn't be fully utilized. "We should have drawn them inland," a Persian commander argues bitterly after the battle, "given ourselves room to maneuver, to use our cavalry properly. Instead, we fought where the Greeks wanted to fight." What happened next would become legendary. As the battle turned against the Persians, Darius, who was watching from his royal chariot, apparently panicked and fled the battlefield. Seeing their king flee, the Persian army collapsed in disarray. "One moment we were holding the line," recounts a shell-shocked Persian infantry soldier. "Difficult fighting, but we were holding. Then word spreads, the king has fled, and suddenly everyone is running. Why fight if your king won't?" In his haste to escape, Darius left behind his family, his mother, wife, and daughters, who were captured by Alexander. Rather than treating them as prisoners, Alexander ensured they were given quarters and treatment befitting their royal status, a move that earned him a reputation for magnanimity. "He visits the royal women daily," reports a Persian servant who remained with the captive royal family, "treats the great king's mother with the respect due his own mother. Strange behavior for a conqueror." After Issus, Alexander turned south instead of immediately pursuing Darius. He conquered Syria, Phoenicia, and Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule and founded the city of Alexandria. This strategic approach secured his flank and naval supply lines before he ventured deeper into Persian territory. By 331 BCE, Alexander was ready to face Darius again. The Persian king had assembled a new, even larger army and chosen the battlefield carefully, the plain of Gaugamela, where his chariots and cavalry would have room to maneuver. "This time will be different," Darius assures his generals the night before battle. "We've prepared the ground. We have space to use our numbers. Our scythed chariots will tear through their infantry. Today we end the Alexander problem." Once again, his confidence was misplaced. At the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander used innovative tactics to counter Persian advantages. The Persians scythed chariots, terrifying weapons with blades extending from their wheels to cut down infantry, proved largely ineffective against disciplined Macedonian troops who simply opened their ranks to let the chariots pass through harmlessly. As at Issus, when the battle began to turn against the Persians, Darius fled, again before any clear winner had emerged. With their king gone, the Persian forces disintegrated. Darius escaped with a small escort, but his empire was effectively lost. Twice, seethes a Persian officer who survived Gaugamela, twice he ran before the battle was truly decided. A king who does not stand with his men does not deserve to be king. After Gaugamela, the great Persian cities fell one by one. Babylon surrendered without a fight. Susa, with its vast treasury, was captured intact. Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire, fell in January 330 BCE. What happened next remains controversial. After several months of occupation, Persepolis was burned. Ancient sources disagree on whether this was an accident or a deliberate act of revenge for Xerxes' burning of Athens 150 years earlier. Some blame drunken revelry, others a calculated political statement. "I was there that night," whispers a Persian servant who worked in the palace. The Macedonian soldiers had been drinking for hours. Then the king himself, Alexander, drunk as well, listened to some Athenian courtesan who urged him to let them burn the palace as revenge for Greece. They started with curtains, tapestries. Soon the whole place was ablaze. By morning, centuries of history were ash. Alexander pursued Darius eastward into Central Asia, but before he could capture him, the Persian king was murdered by Bessus, one of his own relatives, who then proclaimed himself king. Alexander captured and executed Bessus, and by 327 BCE, all significant resistance to his rule had been crushed. In just 7 years, Alexander had accomplished the seemingly impossible, the complete conquest of the Persian Empire, the superpower of the age. But his attitude toward Persia wasn't simple conquest. Increasingly, he adopted Persian customs, clothing, and court ceremonies. He encouraged his officers to marry Persian noblewomen. He himself married Darius's daughter Statera and recruited Persians into his army and administration. "He's becoming more Persian than the Persians," grumbles a Macedonian veteran watching Alexander hold court wearing Persian royal attire. What happened to the young king who crossed the Hellespont to punish the barbarians? Now he wants us to bow to him like he's the great king. This Orientalization caused significant tension with his Macedonian and Greek followers, many of whom saw it as a betrayal of Hellenic values. For Persians, though, Alexander's adoption of their customs made the transition to foreign rule less jarring. "He respects our ways," notes a Persian aristocrat who has joined Alexander's court. "Not like most conquerors who try to erase everything that came before them. He sees the value in Persian governance, Persian ceremony. He's learning from us even as he rules us." Life for ordinary Persians under Alexander's rule varied by region and social status. In many areas, particularly those far from the centers of power, daily existence continued much as before. Local administrators were often retained if they accepted Macedonian overlordship. Trade flourished along routes now secured under a single authority stretching from Greece to India. "Business has never been better," boasts a merchant in a market town in Media. "No more crossing borders, dealing with different tax collectors, different laws. One empire, one set of rules, roads safer than they've ever been. Whatever you think of Alexander as a man, he's good for commerce." In 323 BCE, Alexander died suddenly in Babylon, possibly from fever, possibly from poisoning. He was just 32 years old and had not named a clear successor. His death triggered immediate power struggles among his generals. The vultures didn't even wait for his body to cool, observes a Persian courtier who witnessed the aftermath. Before the funeral rites were complete, they were already dividing his conquests. The empire built with so much blood will drown in more blood before this is over. The Macedonian general Seleucus eventually emerged as the ruler of most of the former Persian territories, establishing the Seleucid dynasty that would govern these lands for the next 3 centuries. Under Seleucid rule, a fascinating cultural synthesis took place, blending Greek and Persian elements into what historians call the Hellenistic civilization. New cities were founded throughout the former Persian Empire, often following the Greek polis model with gymnasiums, theatres and agoras. The most famous was Seleucia on the Tigris, which replaced Babylon as the major urban centre in Mesopotamia. Alexandria in Egypt became the intellectual capital of the Hellenistic world, home to the largest library in existence and scholars from across the known world. Greek became the language of administration and high culture, while local languages continued to be spoken in everyday life. Greek gods were often syncretized with Persian and local deities. Architecture blended Greek forms with Persian and regional motifs. My father worships Zeus Ahura Mazda at the new temple, explains a young Persian Greek merchant in Seleucia. My mother still visits the traditional fire temple. I study Plato, but also the Avesta. We're creating something new here, neither fully Greek nor fully Persian. For the Persian aristocracy, adapting to Greek cultural norms became a path to maintaining status and influence. Many learned Greek adopted Greek names alongside their Persian ones and participated in Greek-style education and athletic competitions. My son spends his mornings at the gymnasium, his afternoons studying Greek philosophy, says a Persian nobleman in Ecbatana, the old Median capital. His grandfather would be horrified, exercising naked like a Greek, but this is the world we live in now. Adapt or be left behind. The rural population, however, maintained more traditional Persian customs, language, and religious practices. Zoroastrianism remained strong outside urban centres, preserved by priests who passed down oral traditions when written texts were destroyed or neglected. The Greeks have their cities, a Zoroastrian priest tells his followers in a mountain village. We have our mountains, our traditions, our fires that have burned since before Alexander was born. Empires rise and fall. The truth of Ahura Mazda endures. This cultural synthesis wasn't always peaceful. Rebellions against Seleucid rule occurred periodically, particularly when kings attempted to interfere with local religious practices or imposed heavy taxation. The most famous was the Maccabean revolt in Judea, preserved in Jewish historical memory as the origin of Hanukkah. The Seleucid Empire itself gradually weakened, losing territory to the rising power of Rome in the west and to rebellions in the east. By the mid-2nd century BCE, new powers were emerging in the Iranian plateau, setting the stage for a Persian revival. As night falls over Seleucia, you watch Greek actors perform an ancient tragedy in an open-air theatre while Persian music plays in nearby taverns. In the streets, merchants from a dozen nations hawk their wares in a babel of languages. The city is neither fully Greek nor fully Persian, but something new and hybrid, a testament to the resilience and adaptability of both civilizations. My Greek grandfather came with Alexander, an old shopkeeper tells you as you browse his wares, fell in love with a Persian woman, never went home, their daughter, my mother, married a Babylonian. So what am I? Greek? Persian? Babylonian? All of them, I suppose, and none of them were something new under the sun. The Achaemenid Empire, the first and greatest of the Persian empires, was gone, but Persia itself endured. Its culture, its people, its traditions continued, absorbing foreign elements, adapting to new realities, and in the shadows of the Hellenistic kingdoms, the seeds of a Persian Renaissance were already taking root. The stars shine brightly over the city as you drift towards sleep, countless pinpricks of light in the vast darkness. Just as these stars will still be there when the night ends, Persian civilization would outlast its Greek conquerors. The First Empire had fallen, but Persia's story was far from over. Wind whips across the high grasslands, carrying the scent of horses, leather, and the smoke from distant campfires. We've moved forward in time again to around 250 BCE. The Greek-ruled Seleucid Empire still controls much of what was once Persian territory, but in the northeastern frontiers, something new is stirring. You shield your eyes against the sun as you watch a group of riders crest a distant hill. They move with extraordinary skill, these horsemen, seeming almost part of the animals beneath them. Each carries a powerful composite bow and a quiver filled with arrows. They're Parthians, nomadic Iranian people from the northeastern steppes, and they're about to change the course of Persian history. "City folk think we're barbarians," says the Parthian chieftain as you share a meal in his tent that evening, "because we live in tents instead of houses, follow our herds instead of farming. But we remember when Iranians ruled from the sunrise to the sunset. And we remember that the Greeks are foreigners here." Unlike your cozy bedroom now, with its solid walls and climate control, this Parthian tent is built for mobility. Made of felt stretched over a wooden frame, it can be disassembled, packed and moved in hours when the clan needs to relocate. Inside, rugs cover the ground, and cushions provide simple comfort. The central fire pit fills the space with warmth and the aroma of roasting meat. The Parthians had been subjects of the Seleucid Empire, part of the territories Alexander conquered and his successors inherited. But as Seleucid power weakened, stretched too thin between conflicts with Rome in the west and various rebellions, the Parthians seized their opportunity. Under their leader Arsaces, they rebelled against Seleucid rule around 247 BCE and established an independent state in the region of Parthia in modern northeastern Iran. This was the beginning of what would become the Arsacid dynasty, which would rule a revived Persian empire for nearly 5 centuries. "My grandfather rode with Arsaces," a Parthian warrior tells you proudly as he shows you how to string a composite bow. "Just a small band at first. Everyone said we were fools to challenge the might of the Seleucids, but we had something they didn't. We knew this land. Every hill, every valley, every water source. And we could fight like no one else could fight." The Parthian style of warfare was indeed revolutionary. As nomadic horsemen, they had perfected mounted archery to an art form. Their most famous tactic, the Parthian shot, involved feigning retreat and then turning in the saddle to fire arrows at pursuing enemies. This maneuver was so effective it entered the Greek language, with the phrase Parthian shot evolving into the modern parting shot. The Greeks fight standing shoulder to shoulder, pushing with their spears, explains the warrior. Good for them, we fight differently. Hit and run, strike where they're weak, disappear before they can respond. They call it cowardly, we call it smart. Under the leadership of Mithridates, 171–138 BCE, the Parthians expanded dramatically, conquering Media, Persia proper, Babylonia, and eventually all of the Iranian plateau. By the mid-2nd century BCE, they controlled most of the territories that had once belonged to the Persian Achaemenid Empire, except for Egypt and Anatolia. When my father was young, we were just one tribe among many, an elderly Parthian woman tells you as she works a loom in her tent. Now our king rules from the great cities, Ecbatana, Ctesiphon, Susa. My son serves in the royal guard, wears gold bracelets, eats from silver plates. Who would have imagined it? The Parthian Empire differed from the earlier Achaemenid Empire in important ways. While the Achaemenids had been highly centralized with an efficient bureaucracy, the Parthian system was more feudal, with powerful noble families exercising considerable autonomy in their territories. The King of Kings rules, yes, a Parthian nobleman explains, but the great houses have their say. No king can rule without the support of the 7 families. We gather in the council, we debate, we decide. A king who ignores the council won't be king for long. This aristocratic system gave Parthia remarkable political stability. The nobility could depose an unfit king through a vote without the empire falling into civil war. Conversely, even powerful nobles could be disciplined by the king without causing rebellion, as long as proper procedures were followed and the punishment seemed justified to the broader nobility. Last year, the king removed Lord Surena from his lands and titles, whispers an attendant at a noble gathering. Surena's family has been powerful for generations, but he plotted with Roman agents. The evidence was clear, the procedure correct, not even his brothers protested. This political stability gave Parthia an advantage against its primary rival, Rome. While the Roman Republic and later Empire experienced regular and devastating civil wars, the Parthian succession system generally avoided such self-destructive conflicts. The first major confrontation between Rome and Parthia came in 53 BCE when Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus, the third member of the first triumvirate with Caesar and Pompey, invaded Parthian territory, hoping to match the military glories of his political rivals. The Romans thought victory would be easy, a Parthian commander tells his troops before battle. They've conquered Greece, Macedonia, Syria. Why not Parthia next? But they don't understand what they're facing. We are not Greeks. We are not Syrians. We are the heirs of Cyrus and Darius. At the Battle of Carrhae, the Parthians inflicted one of Rome's most devastating defeats. Crassus's legions, designed for close-quarters infantry combat, were decimated by Parthian mounted archers who could strike from beyond Roman range and evade any counterattack. Crassus himself was killed, and the Roman defeat sent shockwaves through the Mediterranean world. They just kept riding around us, shooting and shooting, a traumatized Roman survivor tells you years later in an Antioch tavern. We couldn't reach them with our javelins, couldn't close to sword range, men falling everywhere, the sand turned red with Roman blood. According to legend, the Parthians executed Crassus by pouring molten gold down his throat, a poetic punishment for a man famous for his greed. While this story may be more myth than fact, it reflects the symbolic nature of the victory. Parthia had proven itself Rome's equal, establishing a balance of power that would last for centuries. The Romans never truly understood us, reflects a Parthian diplomat who spent years in Rome. They thought us barbarians because we didn't live exactly as they did. They never grasped that our empire was built on different principles than theirs, not lesser, just different. The Roman-Parthian frontier stabilized along the Euphrates River, with occasional wars but neither side able to permanently defeat the other. This created a kind of ancient Cold War, with direct conflicts, proxy wars, and complex diplomacy. We fight, we make peace, we trade, we spy on each other, shrugs a Parthian border commander. Sometimes they take a city from us, sometimes we take it back. The dance has been going on since my grandfather's time and will likely continue until my grandchildren are old. Life in the Parthian Empire varied dramatically depending on location. The western regions, like Mesopotamia, maintained their ancient urban civilizations with sophisticated economic systems, while the Iranian plateau combined settled agriculture with pastoral nomadism, and the eastern frontiers remained largely nomadic. 3 different worlds in one empire, observes a Greek merchant who travels throughout Parthian territories. In Babylonia, great cities with temples and markets that have existed for thousands of years. In Media and Persia, fortress towns surrounded by farms and pastures. In the east, tribal lands where the horse is king. The Parthians were pragmatic rulers who generally allowed local customs, religions, and even administrative systems to continue as long as taxes were paid and their authority recognized. This approach created a diverse, multicultural empire held together by a common Iranian elite culture and military system. "I serve the King of Kings," says an administrator in Babylon, "but I worship our local gods, speak our local language, follow our local laws in most matters. The Parthians care most that the taxes flow and that there is no rebellion. Beyond that, they leave us largely to ourselves." Culturally, the Parthian period marked a Persian renaissance after centuries of Greek dominance. The Parthians consciously presented themselves as heirs to the Achaemenid Empire and restorers of Iranian traditions. They revived the use of Persian titles, symbols, and administrative terms. "My father gave me a Greek education, taught me to admire Homer and Plato," confides a young nobleman, "but my heart beats to the ancient rhythms of Iran. I speak the language of my ancestors, honor their gods, practice their traditions. The Greeks brought much that was valuable, but we are not Greeks, we are Persians." The Parthian kings used the ancient title King of Kings, Shahanshah, and adopted much of the royal imagery and ceremony of the Achaemenid period. Coins showed the ruler wearing a diademed soft cap instead of the Greek royal diadem, emphasizing their non-Greek identity. Religion during the Parthian period was remarkably diverse. Zoroastrianism experienced a revival, with fire temples maintained throughout the empire. However, there was no attempt to impose religious uniformity. Greek gods, Mesopotamian deities, early Christianity, Judaism, and various mystery cults all flourished in different regions. "In my city alone," boasts a merchant from Seleucia on the Tigris, "you can find temples to Ahura Mazda, Zeus, Marduk, Mithra, and a dozen other gods. Jews have their synagogue, various philosophical schools their meeting places. As long as you don't cause trouble, you can worship as you please." The Parthians were also enthusiastic participants in the Silk Road trade network connecting China to Rome. Parthian merchants grew wealthy, controlling the middle section of this lucrative route, and exotic goods from as far as Han Dynasty China made their way to Parthian cities. "See this fabric?" a merchant asks, showing you a shimmering length of silk, made by people at the very edge of the world, so distant most believe they're myths rather than real. But the silk is real enough, and so is the gold it brings to those who trade in it. Cities in the Parthian Empire became cultural melting pots where Iranian, Greek, Mesopotamian, Jewish and other traditions intermixed. The city of Dura Europos on the Euphrates, for instance, contained temples to Greek, Syrian and Zoroastrian deities, a Jewish synagogue, and one of the earliest known Christian house churches, all within its walls. "My neighbours worship 5 different gods between them," laughs a resident of Ctesiphon, the Parthian winter capital. "We argue religion over wine, then go to the market together to haggle with the same merchants. Somehow it works." Daily life for ordinary people under Parthian rule centered around family, work, and local community. In rural areas, the rhythm of agricultural seasons dictated life, while in cities, commerce and crafts provided livelihoods. The Parthian period saw improvements in irrigation technology, metalworking, and textile production. My grandfather made saddles. My father made saddles. I make saddles, a craftsman in Ecbatana tells you with pride. But mine are better. I've learned techniques from Syria, from India, even some ideas from Chinese designs brought by traders. The world comes to us through the great roads. Art and architecture during this period reflected the empire's cultural synthesis. Parthian art combined Hellenistic techniques with Iranian subjects and sensibilities. A distinctive feature was frontality in portraiture, figures represented facing directly forward with intense, penetrating gazes. This style would influence Byzantine, early Christian and Islamic art. Look at the eyes, an artist says, showing you a wall painting in a wealthy home. Greek artists show the face in profile or three-quarters. We show it full on, the eyes looking directly at you. It's more powerful, more immediate. You feel the person's presence, their spirit. Parthian architecture similarly blended traditions. The famous Iwan, a vaulted hall open on one side, became a signature element of Parthian buildings. These grand spaces, often used for royal audiences, created dramatic visual impressions and would become central to later Persian and Islamic architecture. Stand here at the entrance, instructs a palace guide, positioning you at the opening of an enormous Iwan. See how the space draws your eye inward, how the vaulting seems to float overhead. This is Parthian innovation, not Greek, not Achaemenid, but something new we've created. By the late Parthian period, around 200 CE, the empire faced growing challenges. Repeated wars with Rome drained resources, while the decentralized political system that had provided stability sometimes hindered effective responses to crises. Internal tensions between the monarchy and nobility occasionally flared into open conflict. The old ways served us well for generations, sighs an elderly counsellor after a particularly contentious meeting of nobles. But the world changes. Rome grows stronger. New threats emerge from the east. We debate while our enemies act. Perhaps it is time for new approaches. In the eastern province of Pars, the original Persian heartland, a family of local rulers began to consolidate power and build their own base of support. Led by Ardashir, they would eventually challenge Parthian rule directly, setting the stage for yet another Persian renaissance. They say this Ardashir claims descent from the ancient kings, a traveller tells you at a caravanserai, one of the roadside inns that dotted the empire's trade routes, claims the Parthians have become too foreign, too compromising, says he'll restore Iran to its true glory. Dangerous talk, but some listen. As the stars emerge over the Mesopotamian plain, you watch travellers and merchants from a dozen lands sharing meals, stories and songs in the courtyard of the caravanserai. Romans, Syrians, Jews, Arabs, Indians, even a few Chinese, all finding common ground in this Parthian way station on the great trade routes. The Parthian Empire never achieved the administrative sophistication or cultural brilliance of the Achaemenid period, nor would it reach the religious and artistic heights of what was to come, but it performed a crucial historical function. It restored Iranian rule to the Iranian plateau, preserved and revived Persian identity after foreign domination, and maintained Persia's position as a world power for over 4 centuries. As you drift towards sleep, the distant sound of horses reminds you of the nomadic origins of these Parthian rulers. From the high steps they had come, these master horsemen, to reclaim the legacy of Cyrus and Darius. And though their time would pass, as all empires' times do, they had ensured that Persia would endure as a distinct civilization with its own identity, traditions, and destiny. Unlike you in your peaceful bedroom, free from the worries of imperial politics or nomadic invasions, the people of Parthia lived in a world of constant change and adaptation. Yet through it all, the essential character of Persian civilization continued to evolve and flourish, preparing the ground for what would be its last and perhaps greatest pre-Islamic flowering. The dawn light catches on polished metal, making the elaborate crown gleam like fire. We've moved forward again to 224 CE. You're standing among courtiers and priests witnessing a momentous event, the coronation of Ardashir as Shahanshah, King of Kings, first ruler of what will become known as the Sasanian Empire. The glory of Iran returns, whispers a priest beside you, his voice thick with emotion. The true faith restored, the bloodline of ancient kings reborn. The man being crowned doesn't look like a revolutionary. With his carefully trimmed beard and solemn expression, Ardashir could pass for any provincial nobleman. But this former vassal of the Parthians has accomplished something remarkable. He's overthrown his overlords and established a new dynasty that will rule Persia for over 4 centuries. Unlike your modern bed with its machine-made uniformity, you're standing on an intricately woven Persian carpet, each knot tied by hand, the pattern telling stories of ancient kings and gods. The air is heavy with incense, and the assembled crowd holds their breath as the high priest places the crown on Ardashir's head. The rise of the Sasanian dynasty represents yet another Persian revival. Ardashir claimed descent from a legendary figure named Sasan, hence Sasanian, and positioned himself as the restorer of true Persian traditions after what he portrayed as the corrupting foreign influences of the Parthian period. The Parthians became too Greek, too Roman, too foreign, explains a Sasanian official as you walk through the new capital city of Ctesiphon. They forgot the old ways, the true ways. Ardashir remembers the language of our ancestors, the faith of our ancestors, the glory of our ancestors. All will be restored. This nationalist rhetoric masked a more complex reality. The Parthians had actually done much to preserve and revive Persian identity after Alexander's conquests. What Ardashir really represented was a more centralized, more religiously orthodox vision of Persian rule, replacing the feudal, tolerant system of the Parthians with something closer to the imperial model of the Achaemenids. Under the Parthians, the great houses had too much power, the official continues, lowering his voice. The king was first among equals, not true sovereign. Ardashir changes this. Power flows from the Shahanshah, not to him. This centralization of power was accompanied by a new relationship between throne and altar. While Zoroastrianism had existed throughout the Parthian period, it was now elevated to a state religion with a formal priesthood hierarchy, standardized texts, and official support. The faith and the state are like two brothers, proclaims Kartir, the high priest who would become enormously influential under Ardashir's successors. Neither can stand strong without the other. The king protects the faith legitimizes the king. This partnership between religious and political authority would define the Sasanian period. Zoroastrian priests, known as magi or mobads, became a powerful social class with significant influence on government policy. Fire temples were built throughout the empire, and religious orthodoxy was promoted more actively than under previous Persian dynasties. See how the flame never goes out, a priest explains as he tends the sacred fire in a temple, not for days or months but for years, decades, centuries. Some of our oldest fires have burned continuously since before the Greeks came. Fire is the purest element, the symbol of Ahura Mazda's light. These fire temples became central institutions in Sasanian society. They weren't just places of worship, but also centers of learning, record-keeping, and community life. The most important contained fires of different grades, the Atash Bahram, or victory fire, being the highest, requiring elaborate purification rituals and continuous tending by priests. 16 different types of fire gathered from lightning, from hearths, from funeral pyres, from blacksmiths. The priest continues, his face illuminated by the sacred flame, all purified through complex rituals combined into one perfect fire that represents all fires in the world. For ordinary Persians, Zoroastrian practice involved both public and private observances. Daily prayers were offered at dawn, noon, and dusk, ideally in the presence of fire or light. Regular festivals marked the turning of the seasons, with Nowruz, the spring equinox, being the most important, a celebration of renewal that continues in Iran and surrounding regions to this day. My grandfather taught me the prayers when I was just a child, a merchant tells you, as he performs his morning devotions before a small household fire. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. This is the path of righteousness. The choices we make, moment by moment, determine whether we strengthen Ahura Mazda or his enemy, Ahriman. This moral dualism, the cosmic struggle between the forces of good and evil, light and darkness, was central to Zoroastrian theology. Unlike many ancient religions focused primarily on ritual observance, Zoroastrianism emphasized ethical choices and personal responsibility. Humans were seen as active participants in the cosmic battle, with their choices either advancing the cause of good or strengthening evil. The Romans and Greeks think us strange for our burial customs, explains a Zoroastrian elder as you walk past a dakma, or Tower of Silence, where the dead are exposed. They bury their dead in the earth or burn them in fire, polluting the sacred elements. We return our dead to the birds of the air, completing the cycle of nature without contamination. These distinctive practices set Zoroastrians apart from other faith traditions, though the Sasanians generally continued the Persian tradition of religious tolerance, at least initially. Jews, Christians, Buddhists, and followers of various local religions were allowed to practice their faiths, though they typically paid additional taxes and faced occasional restrictions. We have our quarter of the city, our synagogues, our courts for internal matters, a Jewish merchant in Ctesiphon tells you. We pay the special tax, we don't proselytize, we don't cause trouble. In return, we're left alone to follow our ways. It's not equality, but it's better than we've found in many lands. Under Ardashir's son Shapur, Warm 240–270 CE, the Sasanian Empire reached new heights of power and sophistication. A brilliant military commander and administrator, Shapur expanded Persian territory, defeating Roman armies and even capturing the Roman Emperor Valerian, the only time in history a Roman emperor was taken prisoner by an enemy. I was there when they brought in the Roman emperor, an elderly veteran tells wide-eyed children at a village gathering. Valerian in chains, his purple robes dirty and torn. Our king, Shapur, used him as a footstool when mounting his horse. Imagine the ruler of Rome reduced to a piece of furniture for the king of kings. While possibly exaggerated, this story reflects the Sasanians' success in positioning themselves as Rome's equal, a superpower counterbalance in the ancient world. Shapur celebrated his victories by commissioning massive rock reliefs carved into cliff faces, showing himself triumphant over Roman emperors. These monuments, some of which still exist today, were public propaganda on a grand scale. Every traveller on the royal road sees these images, explains a Sasanian official proudly. They learn the power of the Shahanshah, the divine favour that blesses our dynasty. Rome may rule the West, but in the East, Persia reigns supreme. Under Shapur Vom, the Sasanian Empire also became a centre of learning and cultural exchange. He founded or expanded several cities, including the remarkable circular city of Gur, modern Firuzabad, designed according to cosmic principles with perfect quadrants radiating from a central fire temple. The city mirrors the universe, explains an architect who helped plan Gur, 4 quarters like the 4 elements, centered on the sacred fire. From the air, it would look like a sundial or an astrolabe, a perfect circle divided by the cardinal directions. Shapur also established the Academy of Gondishapur, which became one of the most important centres of learning in the ancient world. Scholars from Persia, India, China, and the Byzantine Empire gathered there to study medicine, astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, theology, and literature. We have texts here in 7 languages, boasts the Academy's head librarian, medical treatises from India and Greece, astronomical calculations from Babylon, philosophical works from Athens. Knowledge has no homeland, it belongs to all who seek it. This intellectual openness was characteristic of the early Sasanian period, when Persian culture reached new heights of sophistication and innovation. The empire's position at the crossroads of major trade routes facilitated the exchange of ideas as well as goods. The Sasanian era saw significant advances in engineering and technology. Persian engineers perfected ancient irrigation systems like the Qanat, built massive bridges and dams that still stand today, and developed new techniques in metalworking and textile production. The famous Persian carpet industry reached new heights of artistry during this period. See this pattern? The Garden of Paradise, a carpet weaver explains, showing you an intricate design of flowers, trees and birds, each knot smaller than a grain of rice, colours from natural dyes, madder for red, indigo for blue, saffron for yellow. A carpet like this might take 4 artisans 2 years to complete. Sasanian textiles, particularly silk brocades with elaborate patterns featuring royal symbols like peacocks, griffins and the simurgh, a mythical bird, became prized luxury goods throughout the ancient world. Fragments have been found as far away as France and China, testament to their value and appeal. The Chinese may have invented silk, but Persian weavers perfected it, declares a textile merchant with professional pride. Our designs are copied everywhere, our techniques studied but never quite matched. A robe of Sasanian silk is worth its weight in gold in Constantinople or Chang'an. Politically, the Sasanian Empire was organised into a strict hierarchy with the king at the top, followed by princes of the royal blood, the great noble houses, the priesthood, the secretarial and administrative class, and finally commoners and peasants. Social mobility existed but was limited. Most people remained in the class they were born into. My father was a royal scribe, his father before him, explains a young administrator. From childhood, I trained in writing, languages, mathematics, proper court protocol. My son already begins his training, though he's only 7. Our family has served the throne for 5 generations. The empire was divided into provinces ruled by governors appointed by the king, a more centralized system than the semi-independent satrapies of the Achaemenids or the feudal territories of the Parthians. A complex bureaucracy collected taxes, maintained records, and ensured the king's will was implemented throughout the realm. Every grain of wheat is counted, every sheep taxed, every able-bodied man registered for military service, complains a farmer at a rural market. The king's eyes see everything, his scribes record everything, nothing escapes notice. The military was organized around a corps of heavily armored cavalry known as the Savaran or Aswaran. These elite warriors, drawn from the nobility, wore scale or chain armor and carried lances, swords, and bows. In battle, their thunderous charges could shatter enemy formations, a tactic that influenced the later development of medieval knights in Europe. A true Savaran begins training before he can walk, boasts a cavalry officer, showing you the elaborate armor that protects both him and his horse. By the age of 7, he can shoot from horseback. By 14, he can hit a target while riding at full gallop. By 20, he is a living weapon, man and horse moving as one. The Savaran represented a significant evolution in warfare. While the Parthians had relied on light cavalry using hit-and-run tactics, these Sasanian heavy cavalry could deliver devastating frontal charges, combining the mobility of horsemen with the shock power of heavily armored warriors. The Romans learned to fear our cataphracts, the officer continues, using the Greek term for these armoured horsemen. At Edessa, at Barbalissos, at countless other battles, they broke against our charges like waves against rock. Relations with Rome, and later the Byzantine Empire after Rome's division, defined much of Sasanian foreign policy. The two superpowers fought numerous wars over contested territories like Armenia and Mesopotamia. These conflicts were occasionally punctuated by periods of peace and diplomatic exchange, but the fundamental rivalry remained. My father fought the Romans. I've fought the Romans. My son will fight the Romans, sighs a veteran commander. Sometimes we win, sometimes they win. The borders move back and forth like the tide. Only the war seems eternal. During the 5th and 6th centuries, internal religious conflicts began to challenge the stability of the Sasanian state. Kartir, the influential high priest under several kings, had initiated persecutions against non-Zoroastrian faiths, a break from traditional Persian tolerance. Meanwhile, new religious movements arose that threatened orthodox Zoroastrianism. For Mani claimed to have synthesized the truths of all religions. Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Buddhism, explains a former follower of Manichaeism, a dualistic faith founded by the prophet Mani in the 3rd century. His teachings spread like wildfire across Persia, even to China and Rome. The priests saw the threat and had him executed, but his ideas lived on. Another challenge came from Mazdakism, a proto-socialist religious movement that advocated community property and the redistribution of wealth. Under King Kavad Fen 488-531 CE, Mazdakites briefly enjoyed royal support, causing alarm among the nobility and Orthodox priesthood, who eventually suppressed the movement violently. Mazdak preached that poverty was against the will of Ahura Mazda, recalls an elderly peasant who had witnessed the movement's rise and fall. He said no man should hunger while another feasts, no family should freeze while another has unused clothing. Beautiful ideas, dangerous ideas. The greatest Sasanian king, and perhaps the greatest post-Achaemenid Persian ruler, was Khosrow I, known as Anushirvan, or of the Immortal Soul, 531-579 CE. A brilliant administrator and patron of culture, he reformed the tax system, reorganized the military, and sponsored translations of scientific and philosophical works from Greek and Indian sources. Khosrow understands that an empire needs more than swords. An advisor to the king tells you it needs justice, knowledge, art, faith. He says that a just king needs no guards, for his justice protects him. In his court, you'll find poets alongside generals, philosophers alongside priests. Under Khosrow, the academy at Gondishapur reached its zenith, becoming a true international centre of learning. When the Byzantine Emperor Justinian closed the philosophical schools of Athens in 529 CE, many Greek scholars found refuge in Persia, bringing valuable manuscripts and knowledge. I studied in Athens, Damascus and Alexandria, a philosopher tells you at Gondishapur, but nowhere have I found such openness to ideas from all traditions. Here, Zoroastrian priests debate with Greek philosophers, Indian doctors share techniques with Persian healers. Knowledge flows like water in a garden. In the late 6th and early 7th centuries, the Sasanian Empire reached its greatest territorial extent under Khosrow II, 590–628 CE, conquering much of the Byzantine Empire, including Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia. For a brief moment, it seemed as if the glories of the Achaemenid Empire might be restored, with Persian rule once again extending to the Mediterranean. "I've seen the sea," boasts a Persian soldier who served in these campaigns. "Stood on the shores of Egypt, dipped my fingers in waters that touch the edge of the world. Our ancestors did this under Darius and Xerxes. Now we've done it again under Khosrow. The wheel of history turns full circle." But this expansion proved unsustainable. A Byzantine counter-offensive under Emperor Heraclius pushed the Persians back, while the immense cost of these wars strained the empire's resources and administration. In 628 CE, after a series of devastating defeats, Khosrow II was overthrown and executed by his own nobles. "Too much ambition, too quickly," laments a court official after the king's fall. "The empire stretched beyond its means, the treasury emptied, the army exhausted, the people burdened with taxes. And for what? Territories we couldn't hope to hold forever." What followed was a period of unprecedented chaos. In just 4 years, 628–632 CE, the Sasanian throne changed hands 10 times as rival claimants fought for power. This internal strife left the empire vulnerable just as a new power was emerging to the west, the Islamic Caliphate. "They say a new prophet has arisen in Arabia," a merchant from the western frontiers tells you in the marketplace at Ctesiphon. "His followers are united by a fierce faith, while we tear ourselves apart with civil war. The Romans fear them already. Perhaps we should too." As darkness falls over Ctesiphon, you walk along the grand avenue leading to the massive arched Iwan of the imperial palace, the Tak Kasra, whose soaring vault remains the largest single-span unreinforced brick arch in the world even today. In the fading light, you can make out the intricate stucco decorations and remnants of colourful paintings that adorn the facade. The Sasanian Empire represented the last flowering of pre-Islamic Persian civilization. For over 4 centuries, it maintained Persia's status as a world power, rivaling Rome and later Byzantium. Its distinctive art, architecture, administrative systems, and court ceremonies would influence not just subsequent Persian dynasties, but also the Islamic caliphates, the Byzantine Empire, and even distant China. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps on a silk cushion in a garden courtyard rather than your modern mattress, you might wonder what fate awaits this magnificent civilization as new forces gather on the horizon. The Sasanian Empire stands at its moment of crisis, weakened by internal strife and external wars, yet still possessing the cultural wealth and historical resilience that have allowed Persia to endure through millennia of change. The stars shine over the palace dome, the sacred fires burn in their temples, and the wheel of history continues to turn. The story of Persia has survived Assyrians, Babylonians, Greeks, and Romans. What will happen when it faces its next great challenge? The warriors of Islam riding out of the Arabian desert? The harsh desert wind carries the sound of distant hoofbeats. We've moved forward to 636 CE, and you find yourself in a Persian border garrison facing the southwestern frontier. Rumours have been swirling for months about a new power rising from the Arabian Peninsula, warriors united by a new faith called Islam, led by the successors of a prophet named Muhammad. "They've already taken Damascus," mutters a nervous officer, peering into the desert haze. "Syria, Palestine, Egypt, all fallen to these Arabs, and now they look to Persia." Unlike your comfortable bed right now, you're resting on a simple wool mattress in a stone barracks, your sleep disturbed by the constant comings and goings of messengers. The Sasanian Empire, once so mighty, now finds itself in crisis. Years of war with Byzantium have depleted the treasury and exhausted the military. Worse, a succession of internal coups has left the government in disarray. 4 kings in the past year alone, complains a veteran soldier, sharpening his sword by lamplight, each one ruling for a few months before being overthrown. How can we fight an external enemy when we're fighting ourselves? The Sasanian Empire's vulnerability was precisely what the newly unified Arab forces needed for their expansion. Following Muhammad's death in 632 CE, his followers had consolidated control over Arabia and begun expanding outward under the leadership of the caliphs. Muhammad's successors as political and religious leaders of the Muslim community. The first major confrontation between Sasanian Persia and the Islamic forces came at the Battle of Qadisiyah in 636 CE. The Persian army, though larger and better equipped, was plagued by low morale and leadership problems. "Our General Rustam didn't even want this battle," whispers a Persian officer the night before the engagement. "He negotiated with the Arabs for months, hoping to avoid war, but the king insisted we fight, though he remains safely in Ctesiphon while we face the enemy." The battle lasted several days, with initial Persian successes giving way to devastating defeat. A sandstorm blowing in the Persians' faces aided the Arab forces, as did innovative tactics that neutralized the advantage of the famed Persian heavy cavalry. "They fought like nothing we've seen," gasps a wounded survivor. "Not in formation like Romans, not as mounted archers like our ancestors. They fought as individuals, each man seeking either victory or paradise. How do you defeat someone who sees death as a reward?" Following Qadisiyah, the Arab armies captured Ctesiphon, the Sasanian capital, sending shockwaves throughout the empire. King Yazdegerd III fled eastward, attempting to rally forces for a counterattack. "The King of Kings running from city to city begging for troops," says a merchant sadly as he packs his goods, preparing to flee the advancing Arab armies. The royal treasury carried on the backs of mules, the sacred fire from the great temple transported in secret. The world turns upside down. Over the next decade, Persian resistance crumbled province by province. Some regions surrendered without fighting, seeing little reason to die for a dynasty that had lost its vigour. Others fought fiercely but were ultimately overwhelmed. By 651 CE, the last Sasanian king, Yazdegerd III, was assassinated while hiding in a miller's hut in distant Merv, marking the official end of the empire. So falls 4 centuries of Sasanian rule over a millennium of Persian kingship, observes an elderly Zoroastrian priest watching refugees stream into his fire temple, from Cyrus to Yazdegerd, from glory to exile. Yet Persia has fallen before, and Persia has risen again. The Arab conquest brought immediate changes. Islam became the official religion, Arabic the language of government. Non-Muslims, Zoroastrians, Christians, Jews were allowed to practice their faiths but had to pay a special tax called jizya and accept second-class status as dhimmis, protected minorities. Convert, pay, or die. Those were our choices. A Zoroastrian craftsman tells you in the market of what was once Ctesiphon, now renamed Baghdad. My brother chose Islam and now works in the caliph's court. I keep the old faith and pay the tax. My cousin resisted and died fighting in the mountains. Each of us made our choice. For many Persians, especially those from lower classes, conversion to Islam offered advantages: tax relief, opportunities for advancement, and inclusion in the new power structure. For others, particularly the aristocracy and priesthood who had the most to lose, resistance was fiercer and conversion slower. My family has tended this fire for 17 generations, a Zoroastrian priest tells you at a remote fire temple in the mountains. We will continue to tend it, even if we must do so in secret, even if we must pay these taxes, even if our numbers dwindle year by year. Some flames cannot be extinguished. Many Zoroastrians eventually fled to India, where they became known as Parsis and maintained their religious traditions into the modern era. Others remained in Persia, gradually diminishing in number but preserving elements of their heritage that would influence Islamic Persian culture. The Arab conquerors, while imposing their religion and language, were pragmatic about governance. They lacked administrative experience ruling a vast, complex empire and soon found themselves relying on Persian expertise. "They need us," chuckles a Persian scribe who now works for the Arab governor. "They're brilliant warriors and true believers, but what do desert nomads know about tax records, irrigation systems, or court protocol? They conquered Persia in 5 years. They'll spend 5 centuries absorbing Persian knowledge." This dynamic created a fascinating synthesis. While politically dominated by Arabs, Persia maintained a distinct cultural identity and gradually began influencing its conquerors. Persian administrative systems, artistic traditions, philosophical concepts, and court ceremonies were adopted by the Islamic Caliphate, transforming it from a simple tribal structure into a sophisticated imperial system. "The Arabs conquered our lands but couldn't conquer our minds," observes a Persian philosopher who has carefully studied both Zoroastrian texts and the new Islamic teachings. "Now they speak with our words, govern with our methods, think with our concepts. The sword can take a kingdom, but culture captures hearts." The process accelerated dramatically with the Abbasid Revolution in 750 CE. The Umayyad Caliphate, dominated by Arab tribal aristocracy, was overthrown with significant Persian support. The new Abbasid Caliphate established its capital at Baghdad, built near the old Sasanian capital of Ctesiphon, and incorporated many more Persian elements into its governance and culture. "The Umayyads treated us as conquered subjects," explains a Persian official in the early Abbasid court. "The Abbasids treat us as partners, still junior partners, mind you, but partners nonetheless. We advise, they decide, we administer, they rule. It's not equality, but it's a beginning." Under the Abbasids, Persian influence grew tremendously. The position of wazir, vizier, the chief minister to the caliph, was often held by Persians. The elaborate court ceremonies of the Sasanians were adopted almost wholesale. Persian festivals like Nowruz, New Year, continued to be celebrated. Persian literature, art, and science flourished with Islamic patronage. I remember my grandfather telling stories of the Sasanian court, says a Persian vizier as he prepares for a meeting with the caliph. The throne room I'll enter today is arranged exactly as he described the Sasanian one. The same layout, the same protocols, even similar decorations. Only the language and the god have changed. This Persian Renaissance within Islamic civilization reached its height during what historians call the Islamic Golden Age, 8th to 13th centuries CE. Baghdad became the intellectual center of the world, with scholars from across Europe, Africa, and Asia gathering to study and exchange ideas. A crucial institution in this intellectual flowering was the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, established in Baghdad around 830 CE. Here, works of Greek, Indian, Persian, and other traditions were translated, studied, and expanded upon. In this one building, you'll find translations of Aristotle and Plato alongside Persian astronomical tables and Indian mathematical treatises, marvels a visiting scholar. Christians work alongside Muslims, Jews alongside Zoroastrians. Knowledge has no religion here. Persian scholars made tremendous contributions across multiple fields. Al-Khwarizmi's mathematical works gave us the terms algebra and algorithm. Al-Razi revolutionized medicine and chemistry. Al-Biruni made groundbreaking discoveries in physics, astronomy, and anthropology. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, created medical texts that would be used in Europe for centuries. We stand on the shoulders of giants, a Persian doctor tells his students at a Baghdad hospital. Zoroastrian healing traditions, Greek medical theory, Indian surgical techniques, and now the empirical approaches we're developing, all coming together to create something new and powerful. Persian literature also underwent a remarkable transformation. With the Arab conquest came a new alphabet and a new dominant language, Arabic. But by the 9th century, a literary revival began using a language now known as New Persian or Farsi, written in Arabic script but distinctly Persian in vocabulary and grammar. This became the vehicle for a cultural renaissance. Our ancestors wrote in Pahlavi script, which few can read now, explains a poet in the city of Shiraz. Arabic script belongs to our conquerors, but listen to what we've done with it, made it sing with Persian words, Persian rhythms, Persian stories. The container may be Arab, but the wine is purely Persian. The greatest early figure in this literary revival was Ferdowsi, whose epic poem Shahnameh, Book of Kings, preserved pre-Islamic Persian mythology, history, and identity. Completed around 1010 CE, this massive work, longer than Homer's Iliad and Odyssey combined, became the cornerstone of Persian cultural identity under Islamic rule. Ferdowsi gave us back our stories, says a storyteller who recites portions of the Shahnameh in a tea house. The heroes of ancient Iran, Rostam, Sohrab, Siavash, live again in his verses. For 30 years he laboured, using almost exclusively Persian words, minimal Arabic. It was an act of cultural resistance wrapped in literary brilliance. By the 10th century, political fragmentation of the Abbasid Caliphate led to the emergence of independent Persian dynasties. The Samanids, Buyids, and later the Ghaznavids established states that, while technically vassal kingdoms of the Caliphate, functioned as autonomous Persian revivals. "We rule ourselves again," declares a court poet at the Samanid court in Bukhara. "Yes, we're Muslims now. Yes, we acknowledge the caliph, in theory, but our rulers are Persian, our language is Persian, our hearts are Persian. The wheel turns and Persia rises once more." These dynasties became enthusiastic patrons of Persian culture, supporting poets, artists, philosophers, and scientists. Under their rule, masterpieces of Persian literature were created by figures like Rudaki, the first great poet of New Persian, Dakiki, who began the Shahnameh before Ferdowsi, and Al-Biruni, whose works encompassed everything from astronomy to history. Architecture also reflected this Persian Renaissance within Islamic frameworks. The distinctive Persian features, the Iwan, vaulted hall, the dome chamber, elaborate gardens, were incorporated into Islamic architectural traditions, creating a new synthesis that spread throughout the Islamic world. "The dome of this mosque may bear Quranic inscriptions," observes an architect, pointing to a new structure in Isfahan, but its proportions, its weight distribution, its acoustic properties all build on techniques our ancestors developed for Zoroastrian fire temples and Sasanian palaces. The faithful pray to Allah under a roof designed by Persian minds. The synthesis between Persian and Islamic traditions wasn't always smooth. Tensions between Arab and Persian identity, orthodox and mystical interpretations of Islam, central authority and regional autonomy created periodic conflicts. Yet from these tensions emerged some of history's most profound cultural achievements. Islamic mysticism, or Sufism, found particularly fertile ground in Persia, where it incorporated elements of Zoroastrian dualism and pre-Islamic Persian mystical traditions. Persian Sufi poets like Attar, Rumi, and Hafez would create works of spiritual insight and literary beauty that transcended cultural and religious boundaries. "The outer form may change," a Sufi master tells his disciples in a quiet garden, "but the inner quest remains. Our Zoroastrian ancestors sought union with divine light. We seek union with the divine beloved. The path winds differently, but leads to the same mountain peak." By the 11th century, new challenges emerged from the northeastern frontiers. Turkish nomadic tribes recently converted to Islam began moving into Persian territories. Like the Parthians and other nomadic groups before them, these Turkic peoples would gradually adopt Persian cultural forms even as they established political dominance. "History repeats," sighs an elderly scholar in Nishapur. "Nomads from the northeast conquer us, then we conquer them with our culture. The Seljuk Sultan who now rules us can barely speak Persian, yet his children study our poetry. His court follows our protocols. His mosques are built by our architects." The Seljuk Turks, who established control over much of the Iranian plateau by the mid-11th century, exemplified this pattern. Though Turkish in origin and military organization, they embraced Persian administrative systems and cultural forms, employing Persian viziers and patronizing Persian arts. "The Sultan may wear a Turkish helmet in battle," jokes a court official, "but he wears Persian robes at court, reads Persian poetry for pleasure, and relies on Persian bureaucrats to run his empire. His children can recite Ferdowsi better than they can recall their own Turkish tribal legends." This pattern would repeat throughout Persian history, conquerors arriving, establishing political control, and gradually being Persianized culturally. It demonstrated the remarkable resilience of Persian civilization, able to absorb foreign elements and influence its overlords, even when lacking political independence. As night falls over Baghdad, you stand on a bridge spanning the Tigris River, watching the lights of the city reflect in the dark water. The Islamic call to prayer sounds from dozens of mosques, their minarets silhouetted against the twilight sky. In homes across the city, Persian poetry is recited, Persian music played, Persian cuisine enjoyed, all now part of a broader Islamic cultural world. The stars emerge overhead, the same stars that shone on Cyrus as he founded the First Persian Empire, on Darius as he built Persepolis, on Alexander as he conquered, on the Parthians as they rode from the steppes, on the Sasanians as they revived Zoroastrian traditions. And now they shine on a Persian world transformed by Islam, yet still distinctly Persian. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps on a traditional Persian carpet rather than your modern mattress, you reflect on the remarkable adaptability that has allowed Persian civilization to endure through conquest, religious change, and cultural transformation. The Arab conquest didn't end Persian history, it simply opened a new chapter in an epic story that continues to unfold. And the story isn't over yet. Even now, new challenges approach from the distant east, challenges that will test Persian resilience as never before. A cold wind howls across a landscape of ash and ruin. We've moved forward to 1258 CE, and you find yourself standing amid the smoking remains of Baghdad, once the glorious center of Islamic civilization. The Mongol armies have come and gone like a devastating storm, leaving destruction on a scale almost beyond comprehension. Nothing remains, whispers a hollow-eyed survivor, picking through the rubble of what was once a grand library. 1,000 years of knowledge turned to ash, the caliph executed, scholars slaughtered, irrigation systems destroyed. They say the Tigris ran black with ink from all the books thrown into the river, then red with blood. Unlike your safe, warm bed right now, you're standing in a nightmare landscape of death and devastation. The Mongol invasion, led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, marked perhaps the greatest catastrophe in Persian history, greater even than Alexander's conquest or the Arab invasion. What made the Mongol devastation so complete was not just its violence, but its systematic destruction of the infrastructure that sustained civilization. The elaborate irrigation systems that had turned desert into farmland for thousands of years were demolished. Cities that had stood since ancient times were razed to the ground. Entire populations were massacred. They killed everyone in Nishapur, a refugee tells you, his voice flat with trauma. Men, women, children, even animals. They separated the heads from the bodies and built pyramids of each. They didn't want plunder or conversion. They wanted to erase us from the earth. Statistics from this period are almost incomprehensible. Historians estimate that Iran's population dropped from around 2.5 million to 250,000 in some regions. Cities that had been centers of learning and culture for centuries, Merv, Nishapur, Ray, Balkh, were so thoroughly destroyed that some never recovered. Yet even in this darkest hour, Persian civilization demonstrated its remarkable resilience. Within a generation, the conquerors were being absorbed by the culture they had tried to destroy. My grandfather was a Mongol warrior who came with Hulagu, tells a local official in Tabriz, now serving the Ilkhanate, the Mongol state established in Iran. He could barely speak Persian, worshipped sky gods, lived on fermented mare's milk. I studied Persian poetry, pray toward Mecca, and can't even ride a horse properly. Persia conquers its conquerors, generation after generation. The Ilkhanate period, 1250–1635 CE, saw the gradual reconstruction of Persian society and the conversion of the Mongol rulers to Islam. Under rulers like Ghazan Khan, who embraced Islam in 1295, there was a substantial effort to rebuild cities, restore agriculture, and revive cultural institutions. The Khan prays 5 times daily now, observes a Persian advisor at the Mongol court. He's rebuilding mosques he helped destroy, patronizing Persian poets, governing through Persian administrators. His grandfather sought to erase Persian culture. He seeks to embody it. This pattern of cultural resilience and absorption of conquerors continued even when Tamerlane launched a second devastating invasion in the late 14th century. Like the Mongols before him, Timur brought unprecedented destruction, yet his successors, the Timurids, became enthusiastic patrons of Persian art, architecture, and literature. Timur built pyramids of skulls outside our cities, an elderly craftsman tells his apprentice. Now his grandson Shah Rukh builds libraries, observatories, and madrasas. His court at Herat is the most cultured in the world, filled with poets and artists. The hand that wielded the sword now holds the pen. The Timurid Renaissance in the 15th century produced extraordinary achievements in miniature painting, architecture, poetry, and astronomy. The great Persian poet Jami and the remarkable astronomer Ulugh Beg were products of this era, as was a distinctive school of Persian miniature painting that would influence art from Turkey to India. Look at the detail in this small painting, marvels a court painter showing his work. The individual leaves on each tree, the expression on each face no bigger than a grain of rice, the gold leaf so thin you can see through it. We create entire worlds in spaces smaller than your palm. By the early 16th century, a new force emerged that would once again transform Persia, the Safavid dynasty. Founded by Shah Ismail I, who claimed descent from Sufi saints, the Safavids would establish the most enduring and consequential state in post-Mongol Iran. A new Persia rises, declares a Safavid soldier as their army marches toward Tabriz in 1501. Not just a dynasty, but a spiritual revival. The hidden Imam guides our path. The 12 stars light our way. Through Shah Ismail, Iran will be reborn. What made the Safavids revolutionary was their embrace of Twelver Shia Islam as the official state religion, a momentous decision that distinguishes Iran from most of its Sunni neighbours to this day. Though Shi'ism had existed in Iran previously, the Safavids promoted it with unprecedented vigour, sometimes forcibly converting Sunni populations. Before, I prayed like my Sunni neighbours, an old man explains to his grandson in Isfahan. Now I pray as a Shia, honouring Ali and the Imams. The words changed, the direction remains the same. God is still God, but the path to him has shifted. Under Shah Abbas, 1588–1629, the Safavid Empire reached its zenith. His new capital at Isfahan became one of the world's most beautiful cities, centered around the magnificent Nakshi Jahan Square with its mosques, palaces, and bazaars. European visitors called Isfahan half the world, suggesting that to see it was to see half of the world's beauty. The square is designed to display the harmony of divine and earthly power, explains a court architect proudly. The Shah's palace, the mosque, the bazaar, political authority, spiritual guidance, and economic prosperity in perfect balance. This is not just a city, it's a philosophical statement in brick and tile. The Safavid era also marked Persia's entry into the age of global connections. European powers, particularly England and the Dutch Republic, sought trade relationships and diplomatic alliances with the Safavids against their common enemy, the Ottoman Empire. Strange, pale men from across the western seas, muses a merchant in the bazaar, examining English woolen cloth. They bring timepieces that tick without water or sun, glasses that make the distant near, weapons that roar like dragons. What wonders must exist in their lands, and what might they covet in ours? These interactions brought new influences into Persian culture, while spreading Persian arts and goods throughout Europe. Persian carpets, textiles, and ceramics became highly prized luxury items in European courts. Persian artistic motifs appeared in European paintings, architecture, and decorative arts. "The Frankish ambassador begged for one of my carpets," boasts a wealthy carpet merchant, "offered 10 times its value in gold, said his queen collects them, displays them on tables rather than floors. Imagine, stepping on such craftsmanship would be unthinkable to them, yet they don't grasp their true purpose." After the fall of the Safavids in the early 18th century, Persia entered another period of turmoil. The brief but dramatic rule of Nader Shah included a successful invasion of Mughal India and the plunder of Delhi, bringing the famous Peacock Throne and Koh-i-Noor diamond to Persia. "I saw him return with the treasures of India," recalls an elderly veteran. 20,000 camels carrying gold, jewels, and precious objects. The streets were paved with silver coins thrown to the crowds. Never had Persia seen such wealth, nor such cruelty from its king as his mind darkened with age. The late 18th century saw the establishment of the Qajar dynasty, which would rule Iran until 1925. This period coincided with the growing imperial ambitions of European powers, particularly Russia and Great Britain, who increasingly treated Persia as a pawn in their great game for control of Central Asia. "The Russian Tsar claims our Caucasian provinces," laments a Qajar courtier in Tehran. "The British extend their reach from India. Our Shah signs away rights and territories in treaties he barely understands. We were once an empire that made others tremble. Now we have become the prize others fight over." The 19th century brought painful losses of territory to Russia in the Caucasus, despite fierce resistance. It also saw the first attempts at modernization as Persian rulers and intellectuals realized the growing gap between their society and the industrializing West. "We must learn from Europe without becoming European," argues a reformist at a Tehran salon in the 1860s. "Their science, their industries, their military organization, yes, but their values, their social customs, their spiritual emptiness. No, we have our own soul that must be preserved even as our body adopts new strengths." These reform efforts accelerated with the constitutional revolution of 1905–1911, which sought to transform Persia from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional one with an elected parliament. Though partially successful, these democratic aspirations were undermined by foreign interference, particularly from Russia and Britain, who divided Iran into spheres of influence in 1907. They draw lines on maps, deciding which parts of our country belong to whose influence, fumes a nationalist student. They've never walked our mountains, never drunk from our springs, never read our poets, yet they claim the right to determine our destiny. The discovery of oil in southwestern Iran in 1908 transformed the country's strategic importance and intensified foreign interest. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later British Petroleum, secured exclusive rights to Persian oil, an arrangement that would become increasingly controversial as Iranians realized the imbalance of benefits. Black Gold muses an engineer at the Abadan refinery, watching the thick liquid pump into British tankers. They say it will power the future, replace coal, transform industry. The British ship away our national treasure, leaving us pittance payments and polluted land. This cannot stand forever. During World War I, despite declaring neutrality, Persia became a battlefield for Ottoman, Russian and British forces. The post-war period saw a dramatic change when Reza Khan, a military officer, seized power in 1921 and established the Pahlavi dynasty, taking the ancient Persian title of Shah in 1925. He's a modernizer, like Turkey's Ataturk, observes a government official in the new capital, Tehran. New roads, railways, industries, universities. He's even changed our name. Persia is now officially Iran, the ancient name of our land, but his methods are harsh, and many traditional people resist his Western ways. Reza Shah's forced modernization included mandatory Western dress, restrictions on religious expression and centralization of power. While creating a modern infrastructure and educational system, these policies alienated traditional and religious segments of society, setting the stage for future conflict. During World War II, despite Iran's declaration of neutrality, British and Soviet forces invaded the country in 1941, forcing Reza Shah to abdicate in favor of his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Iran became a crucial supply route for getting American equipment to the Soviet Union in their fight against Nazi Germany. "The great powers use us as their highway," complains a shop owner in Tehran. "Russian trucks on our roads, British ships in our ports, American planes in our skies, all while our people go hungry. They promise to leave after the war. History teaches us not to trust such promises." The post-war years brought Iran's first real experiment with democratic governance under Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, who nationalized the British-controlled oil industry in 1951. His popular reforms were cut short in 1953 when a coup orchestrated by the CIA and British intelligence restored the Shah to power. "One day we controlled our own oil, our own destiny," an elderly activist tells his grandchildren decades later. The next, foreign agents and paid mobs overthrew our elected government. Democracy in Iran was strangled in its cradle, and many Iranians have never forgotten or forgiven. The Shah's return ushered in decades of autocratic rule, rapid modernization, and close alliance with the United States. Oil wealth fueled economic development, but also corruption, inequality, and cultural dislocation. The Shah's secret police, SAVAK, brutally suppressed dissent. "We have highways, factories, universities," acknowledges a professor in the 1970s. "Our women can vote, practice law, go unveiled if they choose. But at what cost? Our traditions erode, foreign culture floods in, and those who question the path are imprisoned or worse. Is this truly progress?" These tensions culminated in the Islamic Revolution of 1979, when a broad coalition of religious, leftist and nationalist groups overthrew the Shah. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who had been exiled for his opposition to the Shah's policies, returned to establish an Islamic republic that combined elements of theocracy and democracy. "Not East, not West, Islamic Republic," chant the revolutionaries in Tehran's streets. "We reclaim our identity, our sovereignty, our spiritual heritage. Neither American puppet nor Soviet satellite. Iran charts its own course, guided by faith and national pride." The subsequent hostage crisis, in which revolutionary students seized the American embassy and held 52 Americans for 444 days, poisoned relations with the United States. Soon after, Iraq under Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, beginning an 8-year war, 1980-1988, that cost hundreds of thousands of lives and billions in damage. "They thought we were weakened by revolution, vulnerable to attack," remembers a veteran of the Iran-Iraq War. "They sent tanks and planes, chemical weapons and missiles, but every Iranian, from school children to the elderly, rallied to defend our soil. The world supported our enemy, yet we survived through sacrifice and determination." The decades since the revolution have seen Iran navigate a complex path, maintaining its revolutionary ideals while adapting to changing global realities. Periods of reform under presidents like Mohammad Khatami alternated with more conservative governance. Relations with the West have fluctuated between tentative engagement and sharp confrontation, particularly over Iran's nuclear program. "We are an ancient civilization trapped in modern geopolitics," reflects an Iranian diplomat in the early 21st century. "We remember empires that rose and fell while Europe was still in the Dark Ages, yet now we must navigate sanctions, nuclear negotiations, regional rivalries, all while preserving our essential character as Iranians." Through it all, Persian culture has maintained its distinctive identity and influence. Iranian cinema has won international acclaim. Persian literature continues to evolve while honoring its classical heritage. Traditional arts like carpet weaving, miniature painting, and calligraphy are preserved alongside new forms of expression. "My grandmother recites Hafez from memory," says a young Iranian artist working on a digital installation. "I studied graphic design in London. We argue about politics, religion, art, but we both understand something deeper about being Iranian that transcends these differences. There's a cultural DNA that connects us across generations." Today's Iran stands at another crossroads in its long history. Economic challenges, social changes, environmental issues, and geopolitical pressures create both constraints and opportunities. Yet the remarkable resilience that has sustained Persian civilization through millennia of triumph and disaster remains evident. As the stars shine over Tehran's sprawling cityscape, the same stars that shone on Persepolis, Ctesiphon, Isfahan, and all the other capitals of Persian history, the story of Iran continues to unfold. From those first farmers in the Zagros Mountains to today's complex society of over 80 million people, the thread of Persian identity stretches across time, adapting yet enduring. And as you drift towards sleep, far more comfortable in your modern bed than any Persian king on his jeweled throne, you might reflect on this extraordinary civilization that has survived conquest, revolution, and transformation, yet always remained distinctively, defiantly Persian. The resilience of Persian civilization reminds us that beyond the rise and fall of empires, beyond the coming and going of conquerors, beyond even the change of religions and ideologies, there exists a cultural continuity that transcends political boundaries and historical upheavals. It whispers to us across the centuries about human creativity, adaptability, and persistence, qualities that have allowed Persia to endure when so many other ancient civilizations have faded into memory. The night deepens, and the story of Persia, from its earliest beginnings to its uncertain future, mingles with your own dreams, like those ancient Persian astronomers who mapped the stars, or the poets who captured the human heart in perfect verses, or the ordinary people who rebuilt after each devastation. You too are part of the great human story that connects us all across time and space. And as consciousness gently slips away, perhaps some echo of Persian wisdom follows you into sleep, the understanding that life, like history, moves in cycles of creation and destruction, joy and sorrow, prominence and obscurity. Yet through it all, something essential remains, waiting for the next renaissance, the next rebirth, the next chapter in a story that has no end.